Guys, make sure to support the author at pat*rayon.com/valriver. Chapter 1, Times have changed, sir. Up. Down. Middle. Good reaction, but not enough. Amidst a series of shouting, interjections like ah, oh, and even fuck were mixed in. The collision of blunt weapons against each other and against the body produced crisp or muffled sounds. Together, they did battle training on the lawn in front of the White Castle of Camelot. On one side of the battle stood the heir to the throne of Britain and the son of King Arthur, Crown Prince Artorius Pendragon. On the other side stood the most serious, feared, and even terrifying member of the Knights of the Round Table, Sir Agravain of the Iron Hand. Currently, Agravain was the one holding the advantage in the battle. To be honest, Sir Agravain, I'm getting tired of this kind of training now. Despite being only 13 years old, the prince's speed, strength, and techniques were impeccable. He was exceptional among his peers. Unfortunately, his opponent was over 20 years older than him, with overwhelming physical prowess and experience. The king commanded me to train you, and I don't care whether you're tired of it or not. Agravain calmly replied, simultaneously launching another attack without forgetting to respond. He attacked Artorius, finding any opening with his blunted sword. Okay, I can compromise, but if possible, I'd rather receive training from a beauty, like that certain purple-haired lady in the tight-fitting suit for example. Isn't that the standard setup? Why does it turn into a cold and ruthless old man when it comes to me? Ugh. The king believes that I am the most suitable person in the Knights of the Round Table to train you. That's how it is. What about the purple-haired lady Gah? The Knights of the Round Table have no women. Upon hearing the other person's earnest remark, the expression on the pretty boy's face instantly became comical. He remembered a certain blonde wolf girl. Hee hee. As Artorius let out a laugh, he was struck in the head by Agravain's fist. Fuck. As a prince, using foul language deducts points. Then came a kick. Although at the same time, Artorius also landed a hit on Agravain's chest, it seemed to have little effect on him. Wearing armor is against the rules, Sir Agravain. If you're willing to fight in armor, you may do so. Artorius rolled his eyes. Among the Knights of the Round Table, he ranked high in speed and agility. If he fought in armor, he would lose his only advantage and go from having a slight chance of winning to having none. The next second, they exchanged blows once again. Artorius was sent flying several meters away and fell to the ground, gasping for air. Agravain did not pursue further. After all, his purpose was training, not victory, let alone murder. Today's sparring practice is... No, wait. However, Artorius interrupted him and managed to struggle to his feet. You don't look well, Your Highness. Do you need me to call a doctor for you? Or perhaps a mage or an alchemist? Anyone except for Lord Merlin, of course. Who do you think is to blame for this? No, it's not the time to dwell on such matters. Wiping the bloodstain from the corner of his mouth, Artorius retorted irritably, what I mean is, let's continue the battle. But... Yet, you think I'm no longer capable of fighting, right? Ever since I started my training, it's been years of getting beaten up left and right. Is that what you think, Sir Agravain? That's the essence of training, Your Highness, the king also agrees. These challenges will make you stronger. And besides... Forget it. He has never been a good father. We all know that. Artorius continued in a displeased tone. Your Highness, when it comes to the king, I believe you should show more respect. Ah, yes, respect, but that's not the point. The point is the outcome, not the process. Outcome. Yes, the outcome. Times have changed, sir. With a click sound, Artorius retrieved a handgun from his pocket. What is that? My secret weapon. I named it the short-barrel self-igniting hand cannon, although I prefer it to be called the Smoky Flash Night Demise or simply Night Demise for a more stylish feel. Feel free to suggest any other cool names you like. Hearing Artorius's words, Agravain maintained a steady expression, but there was a hint of strangeness in his thoughts. To me, it seems like a delicate alchemical device with little practical use, unworthy of the title Knight's Demise. So, where did you get it? Lord Merlin, or some alchemist? Did it involve forbidden magecraft? No, of course not, I still know the rules. Artorius spoke casually, as for where I got it. Do you know how troublesome the Fairy of Avalon can be? Especially for someone as gorgeous as me. Oh, right, I forgot you have no luck with women. I should ask Merlin about these things, but whatever. He aimed the gun at Agravain. Prophecies, astrology, you, father, and all the knights of the Round Table believe that I will bring change to this country. And I believe it too, so screw you, Agravain. He pulled the trigger, targeting his arm. But the bullet was easily slapped away by Agravain the Iron Hand. Wait, this shouldn't be happening. In the next second, Agravain charged forward, landing a punch on Artorius's chin. Chapter 2, Son of Dragon. How long was I out, Sir Agravain? When Artorius opened his eyes again, he found himself still lying on the grassy field in front of the White Castle. A gentle breeze brushed against him, carrying the fragrance of fresh grass. Approximately 15 minutes, Your Highness. Agravain stood nearby, calmly responding. He then asked a question, so, have you learned any lessons from this battle? Well. Artorius struggled to prop himself up. He still felt a bit dizzy. After shaking his head to shake off the discomfort, the Prince of Britain casually inquired, not to trust women easily, especially the fairies. Correct, they are not to be trusted. Especially women like Lady Morgan. Anything else? The downfall of my smoky flash knight demise. I thought the world's first firearm would be formidable. Unfortunately, it will take thousands of years for my legend to deeply root in people's hearts. Of course, the main responsibility lies with the Fairy of Avalon. As usual, I will ignore the latter half of Your Highness's nonsensical ramblings, Agravain calmly stated. Your summary in the first half is correct. Instead of relying on such unreliable devices, you should trust the sword in your hand. Fine, fine, it's all because this is the Britain of Type Moon World, not America. Artorius reclined back. He felt a hint of frustration with his gun. Agravain, as usual, completely ignored Artorius's nonsense. Everyone in all of Britain knew that the mind of the prince was ever so slightly abnormal. In response to this, surprisingly, all of Britain remained emotionally stable and no one made a big deal out of it. Why is that? Let's use Sir Lancelot as an example. Everyone who's familiar with fate must know that he goes crazy and doing homicide when he's provoked. His mind is twisted, and his logic is chaotic. He's a scoundrel who cheats and betrays his partner, doing NTR, it's no wonder he got the berserker class. Even his own son wishes he could stab him as Mordred did to her father. But in the end, none of this stops him from being a good knight. And there was Mordred. And Tristan. Of course, there was Agravain himself. Every one of them had flaws and mistakes, but they were still good knights. Therefore, everyone in all of Britain remained emotionally stable when it came to the small issue of their future king's nonsense thinking. For those who were emotionally unstable, Artorius felt it would be good to have a heart-to-heart talk with the Knights of the Round Table. Have a proper conversation about their feelings. That way, they would surely become emotionally stable. If he were to rule this country, he would definitely do so. Do you need me to escort you to see a doctor? Agravain calmly asked. No need, let me lie down for a while. Artorius reluctantly replied. As the son of dragon, his body's recovery rate far exceeded that of an ordinary person. Moreover, this was the city of Camelot that was rich with true ether. The sky here is always clear and blue, the sun forever warm and constant. The temperature remains stable, with lush greenery and bountiful crops, ensuring the people are free from the harshness of winter. The concentration of true ether, akin to the prosperity of ancient times, is a miracle of the present world. In this dense magical energy, even a single breath is enough to strengthen oneself or heal injuries. Well then, I'll take my leave. As always, Agravain excused himself with impeccable manners. After Artorius tended to his wounds or rather, stared blankly at the sky for a while, two young knights of similar age to him arrived. One was a boy in purple attire with white short hair covering half of his eyes, giving off an outward appearance of gentleness. The other was a cute girl with short blonde hair, resembling a small pup. Just like Artorius, they belonged to the new generation of knights. As soon as the girl noticed something was off with Artorius, she hurriedly ran to his side. Ah, Your Highness, are you all right? Your injuries seem quite severe. Do you need my assistance? Did you lose to Sir Agravain again? Unlike the cute girl, the white-haired boy spoke in a relaxed tone, cutting straight to the point. Yet. Artorius rolled his eyes and replied as such. It seems the new weapon isn't very effective, your highness. He sat beside Artorius and continued speaking in a gentle tone. It was practically given away for free in Avalon, wasn't it? Artorius didn't feel like engaging in conversation with this guy that resembled Nagisa Kaworu, even though he knew the guy meant well. It simply annoyed him when he mentioned his gun. T/N, the guy from Evangelion. Moreover, the art of the sword that Agravain always said couldn't save Camelot and Britain. I'll go get some healing medicine. After a brief exchange, the cute girl hurriedly ran off. She's adorable, isn't she? The white-haired boy looked at the girl's figure and said nonchalantly. Do you like her? Artorius countered. Oh? No, I just want to know your opinion, your highness, the white-haired boy calmly replied. As the crown prince, wouldn't it be good to have an heir sooner rather than later? Then why don't you find a beauty for me? Artorius continued teasing him with a joke he wouldn't understand. Urging me to have children or cosplaying as Nagisa Kaworu won't do you any good here, Sir Galahad. Haha, well, regarding my question. Artorius's nonsense amused Galahad. After a pleasant laugh, he didn't forget to remind Artorius once again. Gareth is quite nice. Artorius calmly replied, but she's not my type. I feel sorry for her. Galahad said. So, your highness, could you be more specific about your preferences? He looked at Artorius half-jokingly and half-seriously. As Britain's son of dragon, what kind of woman would earn your admiration? Noble? Dignified? Majestic? Beautiful? Pure? Or big boobs? Artorius declared, settling the matter. Chapter 3, Hopeless. Haha, that's a good answer, chuckled Galahad happily, standing up and pulling Artorius up with him. As he did so, he mentally ran through a list of women he knew who had big boobs and busta figures. He hadn't decided yet who Artorius admired. Do you have a plan after this? Galahad cheerfully asked Artorius. Being around the same age as Artorius and having grown up together, they could be considered a childhood friend. Of course, their relationship wasn't on the same level as Nagisa Kaworu and Shinji Ikari from Evangelion. If not, I'm going hunting next, care to join me, your highness? Galahad extended an invitation to Artorius, only to be rejected. Instead of that, how about you answer a question for me, Sir Galahad? I will speak what I know. Do you know how to save this country? Upon hearing Artorius's question, Galahad's expression became somewhat, very peculiar. The age of gods will end eventually. It's the trend of history. Except for the city of Camelot, true ether throughout Britain is fading. This has led to a series of consequences. Crops are declining, diseases and even plagues are spreading. The weather is gradually becoming colder. Our country is suffering. So, Sir Galahad, what is your opinion? After saying this, Artorius looked at Galahad with hopeful eyes. Unfortunately, Galahad's opinion wasn't much different from that of the Knights of the Round Table or the average person in Britain. The king is working hard to save the country, Galahad said matter-of-factly. As long as we defeat those foreign barbarians, and that despicable king, we can save this country, right? Do you truly believe that, Sir Galahad? Isn't that the case? The white-haired young knight answered matter-of-factly. I have complete faith in the king. He is the best commander, the best leader, the perfect knight. I, along with all the members of the Knights of the Round Table, take pride in being his knights and am willing to fight for him for the rest of my life. Artorius looked at the white-haired boy seriously, confirming that these words came from the bottom of his heart. Then he smiled happily, patting his shoulder. Just as I thought, Sir Galahad. Afterward, he extended his fist, bumping it against Galahad's fist. You truly are my best friend. I'm honored. Galahad smiled. So, hunting. Nah, forget it. I'm planning to go back to my room for a while. Sir Agravain was really heavy-handed. Well, Gareth will be disappointed. Then, please apologize to her for me, Artorius replied. See you later, Sir Galahad. Until we meet again, your highness. After bidding farewell, the two boys went their separate ways. Galahad headed toward the direction of the stables, where he joined his attendants. Gentlemen, go fetch our horses. Galahad declared loudly, greeted by a small cheer. Meanwhile, Artorius proceeded toward the castle. After a burst of light, a notebook appeared out of thin air, floating beside Artorius, and it opened automatically. On the notebook's page were the names of the Knights of the Round Table, with most of them marked with a cross. Galahad is no exception. He. With Artorius's words, the name of the white-haired knight was also crossed out. Why is it so difficult to do something? Even if you all believe in that warrior woman, she can't save Britain, for fuck's sake. I can't do it alone, I need assistance to accomplish things, but these Knights of the Round Table are all hopeless. Must I resort to cloning hundreds of my mother like Morgan to form a saber team? Artorius couldn't help but mutter as he moved forward. Afterward, the young prince seemed to sense something. Following his intuition, he discovered his father standing on top of Camelot's battlements, their gazes meeting directly. Behind his father stood Agravain, his teacher. On the other side was the Knight of the Lake, Lancelot, with pale violet short hair and a facial resemblance to Galahad. The perfect king nodded slightly at him, and Artorius responded with a joyful smile. This smile brought about a complex mix of emotions in King Arthur. No, in Artoria Pendragon, his so-called father that was actually a mother, and the reigning ruler of Britain, who secretly live as a man. Even now, she didn't know what kind of emotions to use when facing her son. His Highness has progressed quickly. Beside her, Agravain spoke calmly. Among his peers, only a few like Gareth and Galahad can compare. Not to mention, His Highness has shown considerable talent in mathematics, management, rhetoric, and literature. Well, isn't that great? Lancelot spoke in a gentle tone. We have an excellent heir. Sir Agravain. The seemingly young king said calmly, it seems like you have something more to say. Yes. About Artorius. Yes. Tell me. Yes. Without hesitation, Agravain revealed the incident where Artorius had used a strange alchemical device during their battle, as well as the prince's issues concerning his conduct. Compared to the noble and righteous knights, Artorius's character was closer to that of a commoner. He had stronger material desires and enjoyed indulgence. He spent a considerable amount of time each day staring at the bosoms of various noble ladies. In addition, he had lied and played harmless pranks and had significant involvement with the Fairy of Avalon. He calmly stated the collected information, causing the other side, Lancelot, to glare angrily. Unlike the Iron Knight, the Lake Knight didn't hold a low opinion of Artorius. In his eyes, the prince was a dashing boy, attractive in appearance, humble and talented, and his son's childhood friend. If only he had a daughter, he would certainly marry her to Artorius to strengthen the alliance between Britain and France. As for the issues Agravain mentioned, liking alchemy and magecraft was just a minor hobby. Lying and playing pranks showed that he was lively. And as for liking women, what the hell was wrong with that? Just because you're frigid doesn't mean the rest of the Knights of the Round Table have to be eunuchs with you, you bloody bastard. Agravain was supposedly Artorius's teacher, but he acted like a petty person, reporting bad things to the king. If he had the chance, he would make sure to confront such a petty person. Not to brag, but he could knock down scum like Agravain with just one hand. Chapter 4, Merlin, the Shady Bastard. I understand. Artoria calmly responded after listening to Agravain's words. Continue instructing him. Artoria ordered, Britain's son of dragon will one day rule the world. Before that, I need to ensure that I see a perfect king. Your will shall be carried out. Agravain kneeled, performed a bow, and then promptly turned and left. My king, do you really think Sir Agravain will be a good teacher? Lancelot couldn't help but speak up, I mean no offence, but perhaps you should reconsider. I will consider it, Artoria replied calmly. However, Lancelot felt that his king was merely being dismissive. It left him slightly dissatisfied. But soon, that dissatisfaction turned into shame and understanding. The king has too many things to consider. Lancelot thought frustratedly. I shouldn't trouble him. Meanwhile, in Artorius's room. He, failed again, Artorius. The frivolous man with white hair flashed a frivolous smile, playfully taunting the owner of the room. This made the latter look up with a displeased expression, casting his dissatisfied gaze at the so-called Mage of Flowers and Wise Man of Britain, Merlin. Artorius's annoyance with Merlin was akin to his annoyance with Agravain, with Galahad, and even with his mother. He wanted to replace this bastard mage with Mage Imari, his teacher with the Purple Lady, his friend with a certain pink short-hair girl, and his mother with the Lancer one. That's normal, isn't it? Although Artorius had an adult mind, his body was only 13 years old. Influenced by the massive hormones of puberty, it was already commendable that he could think about girls while also considering how to save the world. The key is that I don't want to become the kind of person father expects me to be. I just can't. Although he was dissatisfied with Merlin, he was one of the few people in Camelot who could engage in a conversation with Artorius without restraint. Due to this incubus observer attitude, his nonchalant and disdainful attitude towards humans determined his way of behaving. No matter what Artorius said or did, he would only grin and remain unconcerned. Of course, even if Merlin followed Agravain's example and reported it to his mother, she wouldn't believe it at all. After all, Merlin's credibility in everyone's minds was in the negatives. I know my strengths and weaknesses, Artorius continued in a relaxed manner. Most of the knights of the Round Table in Camelot lack independent thinking abilities. O King Arthur this, O King Arthur that. It seems that as long as they follow King Arthur, every problem can be solved. Such nonsense. Is that so? Merlin said using a cheerful tone as he sat on Artorius's bed, casually grabbing his beast familiar and petting it. Your father is a great person. No enemy can stand against him, you know. It's the opposite. Artorius said, you know, the key is not in the wars. Even if my father were to crush all the Romans, Germanic peoples, his beloved uncle, and his dear sister, reducing them to ashes and scattering them into the sea, Britain would still need to be conquered and fall. It's determined by the era, the natural environment, the gradually disappearing true ether, and fate. He continued, the key issue is that King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table don't know this. Or maybe they do know, but they can't solve it, so they can only deceive themselves. Merlin chuckled happily, as if watching a beautiful girl engaging in futile, contradictory actions to save a doomed country was an amusing spectacle. Yet, Artorius's tone was helpless as he once again confirmed why everyone familiar with Merlin despised this guy. Because this guy's personality was simply too shady and horrible. Although half of his bloodline came from humans and was not fully incubus, he lacked human empathy and did not consider humans as his own kind. Instead, he saw them as something completely different. Thus, he had no sympathy for human suffering, pain, and torment. He merely found it amusing. Although history indicated that the future mage's mentality would change, Artorius, as a normal person with rational thinking, confirmed that he couldn't solely and blindly rely on that mobile game to determine his standards. So, what do you mean? Artorius asked. Merlin cheerfully replied, our dragon prince, the great Arthur's child, the future ruler of Britain, or the ruler of a fallen kingdom. Do you believe you have a better way to save Britain? Of course, I do. Artorius said without hesitation, meeting the gaze of the incubus. What did you see in my eyes? Artorius inquired. Nothing at all, Merlin replied whimsically. Rather than foolishly guessing someone's heart by looking into their eyes, I have a better way, which is prophecy. Perhaps you've forgotten, but I am the world's greatest mage, Then, what is your prophecy about me? Artorius continued asking. Oh, there is none, your future is shrouded in chaos. As the son of dragon who shouldn't have been born, even the world's greatest mage cannot foresee it. Otherwise, why do you think I love following you? Artorius rolled his eyes and then jumped off the bed. So, where are you going? Merlin asked. I'm going to find someone who can be of help, Artorius said without hesitation. Instead of listening to some bastard's self-praise ramblings. Let me guess who you're looking for, Merlin continued with his prophecy from behind him. Morgan, Vortigern, or perhaps Vivian. Artorius responded by raising his middle finger high in the air. Chapter 5, The Round Table Family. Artorius wasn't joking when he mentioned having a way to save Britain. However, as a 13-year-old boy, his ability to do something for the country was indeed limited. He didn't have any authority or say since he hadn't formally joined the Knights of the Round Table. Even if he were to join the Knights of the Round Table, it wouldn't change much. Although the term Round Table symbolized equality, no one would be foolish enough to think that the words of King Arthur, Lancelot, or Gawain held the same weight as those of a newly promoted knight, right? The Round Table had its hierarchy. The closer someone was to King Arthur, the higher their status. And there were 3 factors that determined the position within the Knights of the Round Table: identity, abilities, achievements, and qualifications. Let's not dwell on the first factor for now. Abilities and achievements require time to accumulate, and qualifications even more so. Luckily, there is still some time before the downfall. Leaving the living room, Artorius murmured while moving forward without hesitation. His goal was neither the White Dragon of Britain, the Witch of Britain, nor the Fairy of Avalon. The first two were too terrifying, and the latter, though not as threatening, had an equally astonishing price to pay. Besides, she was unreliable proof of that was the shitty gun that went off. The interior of the White Castle of Camelot was also pure white. It differed from the medieval castles with their cold, dim, and dirty perception. It was forever warm, forever bright, forever untainted. Amidst a faint fragrance, Artorius stepped forward on the perpetually clean red carpet. As he passed by King Arthur's private study, he faintly heard some arguments. The knights were quarrelling, as usual. Even without considering the future split and civil war within the Knights of the Round Table, conflicts within the organization always existed. For glory, for power, and for King Arthur's favour, there had always been a healthy competition between Gawain's faction and Lancelot's faction. Kay, Bedivere, and Agravain remained relatively neutral, not joining any faction, and their loyalty to King Arthur was relatively pure. In a way, they could be considered part of King Arthur's faction within the Knights of the Round Table. Of course, this division was not entirely accurate. Overall, the Knights of the Round Table remained united and loyal to King Arthur. The lines between factions were not distinct. Within Gawain's faction, there were also those like Gareth who were fans of Lancelot, while within Lancelot's faction, there existed a white-haired filial son who always wished to betray his own father. "You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours." Perhaps only a ruler like King Arthur could gather these individuals and maintain a semblance of unity. Artorius paid no attention to the quarrel in the study. As the Crown Prince, he didn't need to show excessive goodwill to any faction or individual, in order to prevent any one of them from misinterpreting his intentions. In that regard, he understood human nature better than his mother. If there were any aspects of Camelot that Artorius found displeasing, it would definitely be the lack of cute girls in maid attire. The castle was a self-sufficient magical fortress. It didn't need servants, gardeners, or even chefs. The castle itself provided everything needed for the knights and their attendants who lived here. So, as Artorius walked, he hardly encountered anyone. Not to mention once he ventured deeper underground. His destination was his own magical workshop. Or rather, it was an adjunct of that bastard mage's workshop. Just as Agravain speculated, Artorius had been conducting magical research secretly. Merlin provided him with the most basic assistance under the pretext of "that seems interesting." This included but was not limited to, giving him magical books far beyond Artorius's current level, opening up almost all magical subjects that could instantly turn someone to ashes, and teaching Artorius everything he wanted to learn. Such as mixing acids and alkalis, steel and steam engines, the periodic table of chemical elements, or even the manufacturing and maintenance of the colossal sentient computer called CCC. After all, Artorius couldn't count on a day when the other versions of his mother wearing a baseball cap, MHX, his mother wearing glasses, MHXA, or even his mother in a mecha suit, MHXX, would appear before him in a spaceship and say, "Son, come and inherit my spaceship. And my Knights of Dark Rounds. And my debts. Be careful not to be found by the debt collectors, mother is going on the run." If such a situation were to occur, that would truly be disastrous, wouldn't it? He had to rely on himself if he wanted to climb the technological tree. Of course, learning magecraft in the general sense is no different. As the son of Dragon, Artorius had exceptional magical talents. Being directly descended from the highest-ranking phantasmal species and having the Red Dragon as his magic core, he was fundamentally different from a mage in terms of specifications. As he matured to his full potential, he could unleash devastating power directly. But when it comes to the best magecraft for him, surely, it's still the enhancement magecraft. Faster speed, greater strength, sharper mind, quicker reflexes. These kinds of magecraft were not used in Artorius's previous battle against Agravain earlier. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lost. As the saying goes, the one who has the most trump cards in hand holds the greatest advantage. So, Your Highness, what is your next task? Oh, creating an artificial being? I'm not actually very good at that. How about asking Lady Morgan? Merlin appeared before Artorius again, a little later, and quickly confirmed Artorius's research direction before happily making such a suggestion. Artorius rolled his eyes and didn't bother with this guy. Is this incubus joking? The so-called greatest mage is incompetent at something? Moreover, isn't my mother, Artoria, an artificial being he helped create? During the time when Artorius's grandfather, Uther Pendragon, feared the end of the Age of Gods and the imminent destruction of Britain because of a prophecy about the white and red dragons, he sought Merlin's assistance. Uther impregnated his wife, Igraine, with the aid of Merlin's magecraft, resulting in Artoria being born with a dragon magic core within her. Artoria, under their control, existed as a man-made savior. Compared to Mordred, which had rapid growth and a short lifespan as a homunculus, or low-quality clones like the Misaka sisters from a certain magical index, Artoria was more perfect. While Morgan may have been powerful, Merlin could freely manipulate and create the most powerful illusions into reality, could summon and used Excalibur at will like nothing, had extensive knowledge of magecraft, and had magical energy comparable to, if not, exceeding phantasmal species. All that was only a small part of his capabilities. Merlin truly proved himself worthy of being a grand caster. Chapter 6, Roman Envoy. Merlin remained utterly useless as always, only seeking more entertainment from Artorius. And today, Artorius was engrossed in his studies, always eager to learn whether it was about acids and bases, fertilizers and pesticides, or steam engines. He excelled in everything using his divine methods and always managed to outdo himself. But the problem was that the Age of Gods was coming to an end. A new era was dawning, a time of mystery nearly extinguished, where magecraft had to remain hidden. It was the coming of the Age of Man, ordinary people with almost no connection to the mystery. It was the era of those barbaric and primitive folks from the north, who had no blessings of mystery and had to rely solely on their own strength to overcome every obstacle. Artorius delved into the study of various megacrafts, immersing himself in a sea of postures, oblivious to the passing of time. When he left Merlin's magical workshop and made his way back to his room, he noticed that the study of King Arthur was still illuminated, and voices of arguments still echoed from within as before. Really? They've been bickering all day? Truly a loving bunch. Artorius thought to himself. With that in mind, Artorius pushed open the door and silently entered the room. In the process, Artoria, sensing someone's arrival, turned her head and met the gaze of a pretty boy who appeared slightly shy but caring. It left her momentarily speechless. Although her son didn't say a word, his attitude was clear as ever. First and foremost, Artorius was concerned about her. He assured her that he wouldn't cause any trouble. In this situation, Artoria chose not to send him away, at least until he spoke and disrupted matters of state. As for the others who were currently arguing, it was primarily his cousin Gawain and the leader of the opposing faction, Lancelot. The two adults felt a bit embarrassed, seemingly aware that displaying such bickering in front of the crown prince was unbecoming. Thus, with Artorius's appearance, the argument in the study became more civilized. The voices grew quieter, and the tone became calmer. At least until they got worked up again. "Hey, what's been going on?" Artorius cautiously approached Galahad and whispered. "Well, you see." Galahad also lowered his voice and informed him discreetly. The incident began with the arrival of an envoy that came to Camelot during the day. He hailed not from any kingdom within the British Isles, nor was the Picts from the north, but from the southern continent. To be precise, he arrived by a Gaulish ship. The envoy claimed to represent the Roman Emperor Lucius Tiberius. The man, dressed in Roman-style robes and adorned with a laurel wreath, exhibited an arrogance typical of city dwellers towards rural folk. He demanded that Britain bow down to Rome, become a vassal state, pay tribute and dispatch troops to form an auxiliary legion to assist the empire against the barbarians. He was a very arrogant man, reeking of decay. Galahad furrowed his brow. It's hard to imagine that Britain was once ruled by people like him several decades ago. So, what happened in the end? Artorius asked in a hushed voice. This so-called once ruled from Galahad's mouth referred to the complete abandonment of Britain, or was once called Britannia by Rome before it was divided into various smaller kingdoms. During that time, Britannia was one of the provinces of the Western Rome Empire. The assimilation between the Romans and the Celts led to prosperity and stability. However, a series of calamities ensued. Massive migrations and invasions by the barbarians of Germanic peoples, court political struggles, and a series of rebellions. The Western Roman Empire had no choice but to shrink again and again. Britannia, Spain, Gaul, and other countries' vast stretches of land were lost from the Roman Empire's control. The Roman Empire was in turmoil and on the verge of collapse. With the loss of central control from Rome, Britannia, which had initially maintained a Roman way of life, quickly fragmented into different small kingdoms. Among these kingdoms, the most powerful and legitimate was Camelot, which was controlled by Artorius's grandfather, Uther Pendragon. Prior to becoming king, Uther served as a Roman military officer. He refused to obey the empire's order to withdraw from Britannia and chose to remain with his own men, eventually becoming the ruler of Britannia. He successfully ruled, or at least nominally ruled, the entire region of Britannia, which was now known as Britain. This situation continued until a man named Lucius Tiberius emerged and became the emperor of Western Rome. Leading his army, he achieved significant victories against the Germanic barbarians, especially the Goths. The empire reclaimed vast territories that were once lost, and many kingdoms and Germanic tribes declared their allegiance to Rome. To give an imperfect analogy, Lucius's significance to Rome was akin to King Arthur's significance to Britain. Both appeared on the brink of their nation's demise and embarked on a difficult and seemingly hopeless path to save their countries. They achieved numerous accomplishments, though their thought differed greatly. As a Roman, Lucius believed he would become one of the greatest Roman emperors in history, much like Emperor Aurelian. He aimed to reunite the entire Roman Empire, guide it through the crisis, and successfully restore it. The great conqueror of Britain, the great conqueror of Goths, the great conqueror of Parthians, the rebuilder of the East, and the rebuilder of the world. Lucius believed that he would be bestowed with a series of great titles before his death. Though that was impossible. From Galahad's narrative, this was what the envoy said. His Imperial Majesty and the Senate declared that they can pardon Lord Arthur Pendragon's act of betrayal. They might even acknowledge Lord Pendragon's inheritance of the title of king from his father. However, the prerequisite is that Britain must once again recognize itself as part of the Roman Empire and make the necessary contributions to the empire. Think carefully, Lord Pendragon. This is your final chance. If you refuse, the next to arrive on this barren island will not be an envoy but the might of the Roman legions. With these words, the arrogant Roman envoy left happily. Chapter 7, Be a Roman Emperor? He's lucky he ran fast. Gareth, the sullen wolf girl, whispered on Artorius's other side after Galahad finished speaking. If I catch him, I'll definitely give him a good beating. The attitude of the girl represented the sentiments of Britain's natives. They were displeased and unwilling to have any further association with the Roman Empire. After all, it was them who had abandoned Britain. In the most difficult times, it was Uther Pendragon who stabilized the situation and repelled the barbarian invasion of the Saxons. Artoria Pendragon as Arthur Pendragon, inheriting the Pendragon family legacy, followed suit. Under the rule of the Pendragon family, Britain thrived, or at least that's what they believed. And now, the Romans wanted to come back and pick the fruits. Most knights thought they were just wasting their time. So, did the king refuse? Artorius calmly inquired, casting a sidelong glance at Lancelot before speaking softly. The king still considering it. Galahad replied. I knew it. As staunch supporters of the native cause, they were displeased with the Roman Empire. The situation was different for knights from the other continent. Like Lancelot, hailing from France, or Gaul, to be precise? Well, it doesn't matter. The country he hailed from had a somewhat passable relationship with the Roman Empire as their vassal. Therefore, he hoped to deal with the Roman envoy in a more diplomatic manner. Even if they didn't become a vassal of Rome, they could at least choose to become an ally. After all, the Saxons were also Germanic peoples, which meant common enemies, weren't they? So, showcasing their strength and joining forces against them seemed like a good option. From a practical perspective, Sir Lancelot's proposal is more advantageous for the kingdom. Artorius thought to himself. Of course, if it were up to me, I'd go a step further. If Lucius Tiberius can be the Roman emperor, why can't Artorius Pendragon be? I have Roman blood too, after all. My grandmother was a Roman. Choosing me as emperor would be better than picking some Germanic barbarian, wouldn't it? Of course, this was just the realistic and shameless thinking of Artorius, not the idealistic vision of the perfect King Arthur. All right. Seemingly tired of the arguments between the two knights, Artorius spoke up and put an end to them. Refuse. The young and petite king didn't hesitate as she commanded, Britain is Britain, and it has no connection to Rome. I don't want my people to be enslaved by Rome again. Send away the Roman emperor's envoy. If they dare to come again, it'll be a declaration of war against Britain. With Artoria's proclamation, the knights of Britain origin, including Gawain, cheered loudly, as if they had won a great battle. And Lancelot, leading the others, though reluctant, chose to submit without hesitation. At least for now, Lancelot's loyalty to the king was second to none. With the matter settled, the knights of the Round Table dispersed in pairs. Galahad once again invited Artorius to play chess or listen to Tristan play the harp, but after considering it, Artorius decided to stay. Do you need anything, Artorius? When facing her son once again, Artoria's emotions seemed a bit complicated. Just like she couldn't explain to Artorius how he came into existence. In the past, Artorius had asked her this question with great amusement before, pretending to be cute as he looked at Artoria, which made her instantly become flustered. After a while, she replied earnestly to Artorius, "You were brought by a stork." Artorius struggled hard to contain his laughter when hearing that cute answer. "It's like this, father," Artorius said calmly. "I heard that my grandparent was actually a Roman." As always, Artoria found it difficult to answer her son's question. "Well. So, father, could you become the Roman emperor then?" Artorius continued with his innocent remarks. "If you were the Roman emperor, would you be able to collect taxes from Rome and use them to help the people of Britain?" Artorius's eyes sparkled. The pretty boy with platinum blonde short hair ran up to his father and grabbed her arm. "After all, I've seen many people starving and I couldn't help them. I heard that Rome is a very wealthy place and it's even warmer down south, right?" "You shouldn't think like that, Artorius." A serious-looking Artoria imparted the correct ways of being a king to Artorius. "It's wrong to plunder other countries for personal gain. But if you were the Roman emperor, Rome wouldn't be another country, right?" Artorius happily replied. "I've studied the records, and the Roman Empire itself was like a colossal arena. Wars revolving around the emperor's throne have been a constant throughout its history. The throne of the Roman emperor has always belonged to the most powerful. In this era, father, you are the strongest one. The Knights of the Round Table are invincible. If you only wish it, then..." "Enough!" Artoria shouted, interrupting Artorius. The boy immediately made a face of grievance as if to say, "You yelled at me. I'm going to cry, you know." It helped Artoria calm down quickly. I don't want to discuss this topic anymore," she said to her son. "Leave now, Artorius. I'm tired." "Yes, father." The well-behaved boy bowed and then turned to leave. "Let's go play chess with Galahad," Artorius thought. And he didn't care at all about the turmoil he had caused in his mother's heart. In fact, he was a little happy about it. That's how seeds are planted. Perhaps they will grow into towering trees in the future. "Is this your way of saving Britain, O Prince?" At the same time, Merlin, the Mage of Flowers, silently appeared out of nowhere, smiling happily after observing the interesting spectacle. Breaking free from the limitations of the island and envisioning the island and continent as a whole? Ah ha ha ha, how interesting! Merlin laughed cheerfully. Ambitious young lad. Rather than being a protector, he wants to become a conqueror. He rather creates a new nation than maintain the old order. Ah, human, you're truly fascinating. Having spoken such bizarre words silently, Merlin disappeared once again, leaving Artoria alone, with a headache. Chapter 8, Clarent Radiant and Brilliant Royal Sword. The consequences of rejecting Rome soon became evident. The grand army of Lucius Tiberius didn't appear on the coastline right away. After all, the Roman forces needed some preparation time. However, immediately, there were problems with the trade routes that imported food from the continent. Not a single grain shall flow into the hands of the rebels. That's what the Roman emperor commanded. Of course, with the centralized power of Western Rome, local officials still could secretly defy the emperor's orders. But the price of food soared. Well, we have no choice. Since the emperor commanded it, our risks have increased. We're smuggling food at the risk of losing our heads, so the price increase is already good enough. You should be grateful, Britons. The merchants pretended to be helpless while secretly chuckling. Thanks to that, the situation in Britain, which was already experiencing crop reduction, worsened even more. The frequency and intensity of disputes among the Knights of the Round Table increased. Merlin, did I make a mistake? Artoria, troubled by these consequences, said, everyone is starving. If we don't have the imported food from Gaul, Britain won't be able to hold on. Not really, Merlin said in a relaxed tone. Displaying the dignity of a king is also an important aspect. If you were to submit to Rome, it would also damage the majesty of a king. Just, forget it. Artoria felt that she must have been foolish to argue with Merlin over this matter. So, she brought up the topic of war again. Thanks to her benevolent uncle, King Vortigern, the the Saxons' influence on Britain grew stronger. From north to south, they almost occupied the entire island. Although Artoria, as the ruler, had won several battles since her ascension, there was still a considerable distance to go before completely driving out the Saxons from Britain. So the war had to continue. Artoria, as the commander-in-chief, together with Merlin as the strategist, prepared for the war. But you also know that this won't achieve much, Merlin told Artoria in the end. Even if you kill 10,000 Saxons, there will be 100,000 more landing. As long as Vortigern helps them, they can easily land on the island. It's endless. The war against Vortigern will be waged, but not now. Artoria replied and decided to change the topic. In the next battle, let Artorius join the fight. Really? He's only 13 or 14. Agravain told me that he's already an excellent knight. Whether it's spearmanship, swordsmanship, horsemanship, or archery, he excels in all of them, and you yourself have taught him quite a lot, haven't you, Merlin? Ah ha ha ha. Even if the secret was discovered, the Mage of Flowers only laughed happily, not concerned at all. Realizing that this fellow was utterly hopeless, Artoria decided to change the topic. What about Artorius? What has he been busy with lately? Artoria, who wasn't good at expressing herself, showed her affection for her son in her own way. That child? Merlin said cheerfully. He's probably seeking comfort in the arms of a certain voluptuous big sister. After all, he can't feel a trace of motherly love in Camelot. Merlin. All right, I apologize. Although he said he apologized, the incubus showed no sign of remorse whatsoever. But, Your Majesty, I'm not joking. His Highness is indeed in the embrace of a certain voluptuous fairy big sister. Avalon? He goes there again. Well, yes, where else? Merlin said happily. After all, His Highness is very popular. He's even surpassed me already, At the same time, as Artoria's fists clenched tighter and felt like she was suffocating when thinking of her son getting stolen. For Artorius, it was a suffocating hell filled with the fragrance of flowers and sweetness, the bosom of a fairy. In Avalon, the ideal land far from everything, within the splendid sea of flowers, the lady of the lake named Vivian tightly embraced the pretty boy. Why haven't you been coming lately, Artorius? Do you hate your big sister? Did big sister do something wrong? Or maybe you've been playing with other girls outside and forgot about our promise. Maybe I should just lock you up, Vivian, with a beauty that surpassed that of mortal women in appearance that could be called a perfect figure, gazed at the pretty boy in her arms with fervent and fanatical eyes. If he were a fool, like the typical dense protagonists of a light novel, he would likely stumble and end up in a bad end in this situation. But Artorius was clearly not that kind of protagonist. It's clearly Vivian's fault. The boy feigned a very aggrieved look as he pulled out a gun from his embrace. This thing is completely useless, Vivian. Even though it was something he had asked Vivian to make, with the same design and specifications. But after Agravain slapped the bullet away, Artorius shamelessly blamed Vivian. Being willful, stirring up trouble, and being unreasonable were not only women's specialties but also children's specialties. Especially when used by a pretty Shota, the power doubled, instantly capturing the heart of this fairy. Okay, it's big sister's fault. What should big sister do to be forgiven? That's what she said on the surface. However, deep inside, she kept repeating in her mind, lock him up, in a place only I know, while displaying a perfect smile. The fairy big sister smiled, wishing she could push Artorius down right here right now. But when she saw the pure and innocent look in his eyes, she didn't dare to act on her desires. He knew it wasn't her fault, but Artorius still wore an expression of you bullied me to gain more benefits. I want to show off my skills in my first battle. He muttered like that. I've been given the opportunity to join the next battle against the Saxons, but it's my first time in battle. I want to achieve feats that will be remembered and sung about throughout the world. Is that so? The fairy big sister tilted her head and pondered for a few seconds before revealing a delighted smile. If that's the case, then wait a little bit. She vanished without a trace, only to reappear in the same spot, now holding a shining sword that resembled the purest silver. Even though it's not as strong as Excalibur, it's not bad either. Artorius thought to himself, it will do. This is the sword that suits the present Artorius the best. Vivian smiled. Its name is Clarent Radiant and Brilliant Royal Sword. It symbolizes the succession of the throne. Take it with you, it will definitely be helpful to you. Really? Absolutely. Thank you, big sister. You really have a big heart, boobs. Artorius said happily. As a reward, he kissed the side of her face. One hand held her neck, and the other grasped the hilt of Clarent. The connection between the sword and him was so close, confirming that what Vivian said was true. This was the weapon that suited him best. It's time for some serious action. Thinking this, Artorius felt like he could let this fairy big sister take advantage of him a little more. And the latter indeed did just that. After being kissed by Artorius, Vivian couldn't wait and embraced the pretty boy, kissing his lips and passionately sucking on them. Chapter 9, The First Battle. The war with the Saxons went smoothly. Or perhaps, it went a little too smoothly. In Londinium, the central fortress city of Britain, the war between the Saxons and Britain lasted for a full 3 days. It began with open field combat, followed by a siege, and then proceeded to urban warfare. The Saxons, adorned in chain mail, wielding battle axes, with their hair loose or braided, clashed against the Briton knights, donning finely crafted plate armor, wielding steel longswords and lances, and mounted on armored war horses. The difference in warfare styles, tactics, and equipment between the two sides spanned an entire era. Not to mention, the knights of Britain possessed a multitude of monstrous warriors wielding magic swords. Artoria, with Excalibur, Sir Gawain, with the Excalibur Galatine, Sir Lancelot, wielding the Erendite, and Artorius, wielding the Clarent. In contrast, there was not a single great hero from the Saxons. They either did not exist in the same era or had no interest in invading wars. 4 versus 0. How could they lose? Artorius thought this way in his mind, completely unconcerned about the possibility of a mishap in the upcoming battles. From the very beginning, he had slain over 100 enemies. He advanced like the most formidable war machine on the battlefield. First, in the open field combat, he charged into the enemy ranks atop his warhorse. In the subsequent siege, he was the first to climb the city walls and plant the flag of the Red Dragon. During the urban warfare, Artorius was at the forefront once again. On his flanks stood Galahad, wielding a large shield and a long sword for protection, and Gareth, wielding a long lance and a round shield for mid-range attacks. Artorius, wielding Clarent, served as the main source of offense and close combat specialist. The three of them formed a small combat unit, pushing forward through the blood-soaked streets of Londinium. Such a display would astonish anyone, who would exclaim this youngster is truly powerful. Apart from talent, effort, the halo of a newcomer, and the approval of the masses, what was most crucial was the sword, Clarent. Just as Vivian had said, Clarent, this magic sword symbolized the concept of succession of the throne and was the perfect fit for Artorius as the crown prince. This sword greatly enhanced his strength. The extent of its enhancement was far superior to any magecraft he could have applied to himself through desperate efforts. It was remarkably potent. Artorius, wielding Clarent, possessed combat prowess on par with any of the knights of the Round Table. He could even hold his own against his mother, as long as she didn't use her wrong Omniad and Excalibur with its ultimate life-saving scabbard, Avalon. The credit for this battle undoubtedly goes to Artorius, said Gareth, who was also on the battlefield for the first time, excitedly by Artorius's side. Being a member of a family of knights, she possessed bravery equal to anyone else's, and after overcoming her initial nervousness, she had become adept at engaging in combat. Yes, indeed, he truly deserves to be called the son of the King of Knights, added Galahad, feeling somewhat sentimental. As he spoke, he skillfully used his massive black shield to block arrows shot from a distance, but they were far too feeble to cause any harm. The reason for this is also thanks to your assistance, Gareth, Galahad. Artorius said happily. Though his sword couldn't unleash beams of light since it hadn't reached the status of a noble phantasm. Nonetheless, Artorius felt content. His path to saving Britain had taken another step forward. This excitement persisted until they reached the next intersection. A berserker knight clad in heavy plate armor, wearing a horned helmet, and wielding a great sword swung wildly from one end of the street to the other. That's Mordred, how violent! While the trio knight's goal was only to take lives, Mordred the berserker knight wielding a large sword unleashed relentless attacks, each one thoroughly destroying the bodies of the opponents. The excessive brute force would decapitate, sever waists, and dismember enemies. Along the path of the onslaught, there were severed limbs scattered everywhere. Rather than calling it a battle, it was more like indulging in the pleasure of slaughter. This was the person known as Mordred. No wonder this tomboy isn't popular in Knights of the Round Table. Artorius thought to himself. At the same time, as if sensing the presence of Artorius and his companions, Mordred turned her head, glanced at them, and then left without saying a word. How cold-hearted! Gareth muttered, furrowing her brow. Galahad remained silent, but he surely felt some dissatisfaction as well. Artorius, on the other hand, understood the complex psychological dynamics of this tomboy. Family issue, hey. His great-uncle, Vortigern, was an enemy. His aunt, Morgan Le Fay, was also an enemy. His tomboy sister, Mordred, was an enemy too. And of course, there were his cousins Gawain, Gareth, Gaheris, and Agravain, each presented their own troubles. What a challenging family! At the age of 14, Artorius could still barely get away with his pretty Shota tactics, but what would happen in a few more years? Since he would grow into a handsome man, would he need to rely on Eichmann tactics? I need to come up with another way to win over everyone in Knights of the Round Table. Artorius thought to himself. At the same time, even though Mordred was younger than Artorius, her physique resembled that of an adult more than his. She had already roared in anger and charged in a more distant direction. Being a descendant of King Arthur herself, she felt a sense of competition with Artorius. Even though she had joined the battlefield earlier than Artorius, when she saw his performance in this battle, she couldn't help but feel frustrated, as if she had been outdone. And of course, there was also the inexplicable joy of thinking, he is truly the son of the king. First, I'll conquer Mordred. Watching Mordred's retreating figure, Artorius thought to himself, after all, it's easier to deceive children, right? Since his conquering records began, it took Artorius half a day to conquer the duchess he randomly found, while the Lady of the Lake took 2 hours. So the question is, how long will it take for him to conquer Mordred? Chapter 10, Mordred. On that evening, victory was achieved. King Arthur's army naturally achieved a resounding victory. However, since they still had to face another battle tomorrow, the king's army hadn't completely relaxed yet. The fortified city of Londinium had been reclaimed, but the usurper King Vortigern had not been defeated. Tomorrow, King Arthur's great army would march into Vortigern's throne, the northern capital. So, after a little celebration, everyone returned to their respective tents to rest and recuperate. Mordred did the same. Exhausted from the day's events, Mordred muttered to herself, Artorius is just too strong. As she removed her armor. Unlike other knights who had several attendants to assist them, Mordred, even as a member of the Round Table, always remained alone. She kept herself hidden in the corners of the army, avoiding being noticed. This stemmed from the teachings of her mother that always said never let anyone discover your true identity. Even when sleeping, she couldn't remove her helmet. It had to stay on in case someone unknowingly saw her face. There were no attendants either. So whether equipping or removing armor, she had to do it all alone. Even when sleeping, she couldn't find peace. Mordred had become accustomed to all these things. Indeed, he truly is the king's son. After sighing, she thought to herself with a hint of delight. Contrary to what many might think, Mordred had not yet awakened the feeling of jealousy and hatred at this time. Instead, she loved everything related to King Arthur so much that she held Artorius in high regard. But that was it. She didn't even consider Artorius as her own brother. Ah, of course, it was the same for Gawain, Gareth, and Agravain. This relaxed mood continued until the next second when footsteps were heard outside the tent. Damn! Mordred hastily put on her helmet and reached for her large sword, all while hearing the voice of Artorius from outside the tent. Mordred, it's me, Artorius. The clear voice of the prince reached Mordred, causing her some confusion. It's already late, Your Highness. Mordred responded in a deep voice, asking Artorius, is there something you need? Yes, there's something I want to talk to you about, Artorius replied. Can I come in, Mordred? Mordred felt a bit flustered inside. Please come in. Although she appeared older than Artorius, as a homunculus, her actual age was much younger than her appearance. Hence, her thinking was not mature and quite naive. Sorry for the intrusion. Thus, the pretty boy, who bore the glory of all Britain, entered the tent. Perhaps, in terms of appearance, Artoria as the male King Arthur, was not inferior to Artorius during her youth. But at that time, Artoria's living conditions were extremely harsh. Like a dusty pearl, she couldn't emit a perfect radiant light. That's why Artorius, as Artorius' son that was born attractive, surpassed everyone in Britain's history. He even ranked among the top 3 in the world. Therefore, when he sat in front of Mordred and extended his hand to grab her hand, she inexplicably felt her heartbeat quicken. Mordred, in fact, there's something I want to tell you, Artorius said with a serious tone. What is it? Mordred stuttered. I've noticed that you're always alone. Artorius continued. It seems you don't have any friends in the Knights of the Round Table. I haven't seen you engage in any leisure activities. Chess, singing, dancing, no one has invited you for hunting or fishing, and you always wear your helmet. Therefore, Mordred, do you have something you find difficult to talk about? Artorius asked. In yesterday's battle, I saw your figure. It was valiant, but it seemed like you were venting something. Is there inner turmoil within your heart? I've been thinking about this for a while, and I couldn't help but come to find you. Naturally, Mordred was left speechless by the sincere tone and caring gaze of the boy. As an illegitimate child much younger than Artorius, she received nothing but hatred and animosity from her mother Morgan Le Fay. Even after joining the Knights of the Round Table, she hadn't gained any friendships. No one cared about her or paid her any attention. Even her admiration and expectations for King Arthur had never been reciprocated by the king. Because she couldn't reveal her appearance, she had to live in seclusion to hide her identity. It was impossible for her to find friends. And of course, due to her quirk, there weren't many people in the Round Table willing to befriend her. Except for Artorius. The pretty boy had approached the innocent girl with no ulterior motives, yet of course. So, Mordred, do you have any questions? Is there anything troubling you or something you want to share with me? You can tell me anything. Artorius continued exuding the charm of Europe's #1 attractive boy, speaking words that made Mordred feel happy and troubled at the same time. Whether it was happiness or distress, it all ultimately stemmed from her confusion about friendship. Until now, Mordred had always been alone. She had never experienced any emotions. No matter whether it comes from the affection of parents, relatives, friends, or even lovers, she had none. Because of having nothing, she yearned for it even more. Yet, because of having nothing, she was at a loss. Even though her emotions were about to overflow from her heart, she stumbled over her words, not knowing how to express herself. Don't you want to say anything? As a result, the boy's hopes and earnestness turned into disappointment and helplessness. Well, this is as expected, really, Artorius. Immediately continued his speech with a forced smile. After all, I haven't had many conversations with you before this. It's natural not to trust me, but I will definitely pay more attention to you from now on. I believe that someday, you will open your heart to me. Unlike Artoria, who maintained a noble and even indifferent attitude, Artorius, who knew he couldn't emit that kind of perfect radiance, was better at expressing his emotions in a more ordinary way to resonate with others. Just like now, after saying those words, he opened his arms wide and tightly embraced Mordred. He held the girl, whose delicate and soft body resembled his mother, in his arms. Chapter 11, Artorius Way. What a good kid! Artorius couldn't help but think as he held Mordred. Unlike his mother, who had stopped growing after wielding the holy sword, in theory, Mordred could continue to grow and even reach the level of his mother's version of Lancer. But in reality, it wasn't so. Even when the time shifted to the Battle of Cam Lan, Mordred remained the same as Artoria. She had also ceased to grow. No childhood, no future. Forever stuck at the age of 15. With these thoughts in mind, Artorius released his grip. Sorry. He apologized for his sudden, overly intimate behavior and then turned to leave. But before that happened, Your Highness. Just as Artorius had hoped, Mordred called out to him. I know. While Mordred contemplated how she should express herself and what she wanted, Artorius had already provided the answer. I will make time to come back, Artorius said gently to her. After finishing his words, he turned around again and left completely. Behind him, Mordred felt her face growing warm. She sat down abruptly as if all the strength had drained from her body. An unprecedented feeling surged within her, making her feel happy, excited, and yet apprehensive. Look who's here. As Artorius made his way back to his tent, as expected, a certain bastard mage appeared. He struck up a conversation with Artorius in a casual tone. The rising star of Knights of the Round Table. The playboy who enjoys deceiving women. You must know Mordred's true identity, right? She's still a child, you know. So, you came here just to tell me that? Artorius asked calmly. Of course not, Merlin said without hesitation. He claimed he was merely here to enjoy the show. It left Artorius uninterested in continuing the conversation. But just before he turned back to go to sleep, Merlin spoke up. So, are you planning to go down the womanizer path from now on? Who isn't? Artorius replied. Merlin pondered for a moment, recalling a few faces. Lancelot, Gawain, Tristan, Kay, and then came to a realization that Artorius's statement had no issues at all. Merlin found himself with nothing to say. The Round Table's history of debauchery was too extensive, and their moral boundaries were too low. Thus, they had no right to criticize Artorius. As for Merlin himself, he had an even longer history of misdeeds, and his moral boundaries were even lower. Therefore, he had even less right to criticize Artorius. However, since he was a shameless bastard, he didn't give up and give a fuck. So, is this your way of saving Britain? I can't reach the level of my father. Artorius said casually. So, in order to make myself popular, I have to use other methods, don't I? Authority, status, strength, wealth, and emotions. As long as they are used properly, everything can become a weapon. The first target was Vivian. But because she wasn't human, she was quite unpredictable and it quite bugged his determination. The second one was Mordred. Embracing the clone of his own mother gave Artorius an unprecedented feeling. The young Mordred would eventually grow up and develop feelings for someone. So why couldn't that person be him? Be careful not to get too carried away, Artorius, Merlin said in a light-hearted tone behind Artorius. What did you see? Artorius turned to look at him and asked, didn't you say that my future was a chaotic one, something even you couldn't see? It's not about seeing, it's about experience, Merlin tapped his head. Toying with the hearts of maiden is highly immoral and dangerous, you know. They might come after you, chop off your head, and throw it into the English Channel. Artorius remained silent, but his disdainful gaze conveyed it all. Do you, a scumbag, have the audacity to say these things to me? Being mocked, even so, Merlin didn't feel disappointed at all. On the contrary, he was looking forward to it. He was anticipating Artorius's upcoming performance. That night, Mordred tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Having suffered from insomnia throughout the night, and as expected, she performed poorly in the battle against the White Dragon Vortigern's army the next day. Artorius, on the other hand, once again distinguished himself, effortlessly breaking through the ranks of the White Dragon's army with the usual trio of Gareth, Galahad, and himself, creating a gap in the front line. The White Dragon's army consisted of either the terrified Saxons or the dissatisfied Britons to King Arthur. The battle encountered only minor setbacks, causing these people to scatter like frightened rabbits. The path to the White Dragon's throne was clear. My king, we can continue the attack. At this moment, standing beside Artoria was her nephew, Gawain. With Excalibur Galatine in his hand, he appeared quite excited. Well, that was normal. As long as they defeated the usurper king, the war situation between Britain and the Saxons would achieve a temporary victory. Just like the propaganda Artoria had always proclaimed. Once we win the war, everything will improve. The current harsh climate in Britain is all because of the usurper king's misdeed. By defeating the enemy, a life of happiness will come. Even though it was far from the truth. Afterward, Artoria and Gawain accompanied by a group of elite knights entered Vortigern Pendragon's castle. Hey! Next to Artorius, Gareth reached out and stopped the prince as he began to move forward. The valiant wolf girl was somewhat surprised. Your Highness! I'm a little curious. Artorius said to her, what kind of person is that usurper king? He's a vile king who has brought evil barbarians as allies to try and rule all of Britain, Gareth replied naturally, using the official propaganda of Camelot. Perhaps, but more than that, I want to see for myself. But... As Gareth hesitated, Artorius walked straight into the castle, with Galahad calmly following behind him. If you want to keep up, then hurry. Without even looking back, Artorius said to her. After a few seconds of hesitation, Gareth joined them. Chapter 12, The Usurper King Vortigern. Walking through the cold, empty corridor, Artorius pondered in his mind. In fact, He had long wanted to meet his great-uncle. However, being on opposing sides, the White Dragon represented the ruthless side of Britain. It was too dangerous to meet him, so Artorius had to suppress that desire. As for the reason he wanted to meet him, it was for cooperation. Compared to his mother, who was filled with idealism and emotions for Britain and the Celts, Artorius was more realistic and indifferent. He knew the future course of history. King Arthur would be defeated, followed by massive invasions from the Angles and Saxons, eventually occupying large areas of England. Afterward, there would be the invasion of the Vikings. And even later, the invasion of William the Conqueror, the illegitimate son of Normandy, representing the franchised Vikings. The Vikings, Normans, Angles, and Saxons would fight, kill, and assimilate each other on the British Isles, ultimately forming a completely new ethnicity. The Anglo-Saxons, the first to undergo the Industrial Revolution, would become a terrifying nation that dominated the seven seas, maintaining world hegemony for hundreds of years. In the future, they would establish an upgraded version of Britain, known as the United Kingdom. The history of Britain was far from over. The most exciting scene was yet to unfold, but it would take thousands of years. What would truly perish and come to an end were the Celts of Britain. It was because the mystery of the world was destined to vanish. The true ether of the world would undoubtedly perish. The phantasmal species that could hide had already sought refuge in the reverse side of the world, the inner sea of the planet. Those that couldn't hide would naturally be eliminated. As a result, the ancient humans, the Celts blessed by true ether that coexist with mystery, were also on Gaia's list of extinction. It was predetermined. Furthermore, due to the existence of the large-scale security organization known as Chaldea, even if Artoria succeeded in saving Britain, this world would become a singularity or a lost belt. Ultimately, it would be judged and annihilated. This was the will of Gaia, the will of the planet. It was an almost insolvable despair. At least until his other mother arrived, piloting a planet-destroyer spaceship, and expanded the situation to the entire galaxy. Unfortunately, perhaps due to the excessive number of evil gods in the servant universe, she had no time to deal with Earth's affairs. And because of that, it might be better to integrate with the Saxons. It could be a solution. Artorius, who knew the future, had always thought this way. Unless in the future, he possessed planetary-level power, or even power surpassing that. Otherwise, he could only try to save as many people and things as possible while conforming to counter-force. There were two ways to integrate. One was passive, and the other was active. The passive one was akin to the Mongolians, the Jurchens, and the 5 barbarians of ancient China. The active one was comparable to the unification of Qi and the eradication of the Eastern Lai, the subjugation of the Western Rong by the Qin, and the hegemony of Chu in the southern territories. The key lay in who held the initiative. For the passive one, after the Battle of Camlan, the entire Celts population in Britain had been weakened to the point of insignificance, allowing them to be completely assimilated with the Saxons by themselves. Alternatively, one could actively manipulate and control, much like the usurper King Vortigern, and become the leader of the Saxons, taking control of the integration with the Saxons. The situations and outcomes of the two methods would undoubtedly be different. If I remember correctly. Yes, if Artorius remembered correctly, according to the historical records he saw in the Type Moon world before his reincarnation, Merlin spoke of the inevitable downfall of Britain, and his mother had been shaken to some extent and had actively proposed the method of integration. However, in the end, Artoria hesitated and wavered. One could even say that she evaded it. So now the key lies in the heart of my great-uncle. Artorius thought to himself, is he guiding the Saxons' invasion of Britain out of desire and ambition, or is he preparing to save the country through indirect means? If it was the former, then so be it. But if it was the latter? Well, even if it was the latter, he still must die. After all, for the sake of reassuring everyone, his great-uncle's reputation among the Celts had already reached the level of Tosaka Tokyomi. For everyone's peace of mind, he must die. Even if what he was doing was right, for the sake of saving Britain. With this thought in his mind, Artorius stopped in his tracks. Artorius. The person who noticed Artorius's arrival was his cousin, Gawain. In the war between dragons, he, being a mortal, had no chance of getting involved. Gawain, are you just going to stand there and watch? Artorius glanced at his cousin, then ignored his words like, how did you come here? It's dangerous. And blah blah blah. Artorius lifted his head. In midair, his mother was battling a giant white dragon. And the outcome had already been decided when Artorius had just gripped the handle of his sword, Clarent. The radiant light released by the holy lance Rongominiad pierced through the white dragon in an instant. And thus, the war between the red and white dragons came to an end. The massive white dragon, standing tall at the pinnacle of phantasmal species, let out a mournful cry as it fell from the sky. Its body gradually shrank during the descent, and when it hit the ground, it had returned to its original form, a spiritually exhausted old man with a face full of sorrow, as if tormented. What a fool! Even with such a large knight spear impaled in his chest, the old man didn't die immediately. O son of my brother, Uther! Deceived like any other Briton, the old man mistook Artoria for a male. You cannot save this country. You are unable to bring victory to humanity. Like a dying curse, wrinkles suddenly appeared on the old man's face, a final flicker before death. Because the age of gods has already ended, and true ether is about to vanish. That's what you want to say, right? Behind Artoria, a childish voice came from the mouth of the pretty boy, choking the old man. Artoria turned her head in puzzlement, looking at her own son who calmly moved forward, surrounded by two equally young next-generation knights of the Round Table, Gareth and Galahad. Artorius ignored his mother, walked past her, and approached the old man. He then crouched down and whispered in his ear. Lead the Saxons and do intermarriage to integrate with them. Cooperate with the Romans, transforming the Kingdom of Britain into a Roman Britain province. Then, march onto the Roman continent, vie for the throne, and rebuild the Roman Empire. What do you think of this plan, my dear great-uncle? After saying these words, Artorius stood back and looked at Vortigern. This plan went further than his, Vortigern Pendragon's plan. It was grander and crazier, to the extent that the old man looked at him with an incredulous gaze as if seeing an alien. Your name? Artorius Pendragon. The son of King Arthur. Artorius whispered. What do you want to do? Just as I said to you earlier, Artorius replied, as for why I'm telling you, well, since you're on the brink of death, why not give me everything you can offer? How about that? Upon hearing Artorius speak this way, Artoria, standing behind him, opened her mouth, wanting to say something. The old man in front of him did the same. Staring at Artorius, Vortigern, who saw him for the first time, paused for 2 seconds before saying to Artorius. You're so despicable and shameless. Why aren't you born as my son? Chapter 13, Holy Grail. Artoria, upon hearing Vortigern's words, almost launched another attack against him. However, in the end, she refrained. After being defeated by Artoria, regardless of Vortigern's ambitions, he was powerless. A few minutes later, the old man died, laughing happily. Amidst his laughter, his castle dispersed like dust. In the sky, the dark clouds dissipated, and sunlight poured down. Artoria, bathed in sunlight, walked towards the army amidst the cheers of the masses. Artorius followed closely behind her. He observed his mother, the so-called perfect king, resembling a divine being from a close distance. On the other side, Gawain trembled with excitement. At that moment, everyone believed that Britain's future was bright and that following King Arthur would lead them to the pinnacle. Although, in reality, Britain was on the verge of destruction. That night, in Artoria's tent. Artorius. Artoria gazed at her son with a complex expression. He was the blessed son of Britain, with a hint of regret in her heart. If only I had shown more affection to Artorius. If only I had paid more attention to Artorius. Would things have turned out differently? So. Unlike Artoria, Artorius appeared relaxed, as if nothing had happened. But that wasn't the case. If one observed closely, one would notice the differences in Artorius now. His skin was fairer, and his platinum blonde hair color had lightened. If it were a little whiter, it would be close to the level of Snow White. Moreover, upon careful perception, one could sense that the power of the son of dragon, belonging to the dragon, had been fully awakened. It was different from before when it was immature and still adapting. Now, Artorius could call upon the power of the highest level phantasmal species at any time, with a power close to that of a near-divine existence. This was the parting gift of the White Dragon King upon his death. Due to their blood ties, close kinship, and the proximity of their power attributes, Artorius absorbed almost all of Vortigern Pendragon's power, acquiring more than 90%. I can explain these matters. Artorius began, not with questions like "Why did you summon me?" or "What do you want me for?" but rather straightforwardly. "Britain is about to be destroyed, isn't it? As for the reasons, I already know them completely." Upon hearing Artorius speak in this manner, Artoria couldn't utter a word of her usual admonishing remarks such as "Why did you do this?" or similar phrases. Because she had no right, nor any reason to do so. If Artoria were to tell her son like, "You're still too young, you don't know what you're doing," it might seem ironic. After all, she herself drew Caliban, the sword of selection at a relatively young age of 15, not far from her son's current age. In a way, she felt her son was much smarter than herself. Compared to her, who was moving forward step by step, driven by the wheels of history, Artorius had more plans and foresight for the future. "So, what do you mean?" Artoria suppressed negative emotions and asked Artorius. "What I mean is, Britain is no longer suitable for habitation," Artorius calmly replied. "Father, do you have any solution for this?" "Actually, I have thought of a solution." To Artorius's surprise and resignation, Artoria continued, "Britain lacks true ether. To reverse the problem of true ether gradually dissipating, we need a miracle. So, I plan to search for that miracle, something that can restore the concentration of true ether in Britain." "Don't tell me, the Holy Grail." After a brief moment of contemplation, Artorius provided this answer. "Not the one for third magic, the so-called Holy Grail created by the three founding families of Thuiaki, but an actual Holy Grail, a universal wish-granting machine capable of creating miracles. It was also the latter half of King Arthur's legend, the object that the Knights of the Round Table seemed to obsessively search for. As long as we find that thing, we can save Britain. Therefore, we must give our all, we must go all out." And so, countless Knights of the Round Table embarked on the path to find the Holy Grail. Countless Knights of the Round Table died on the path in desperate exploration. The final result, however, was incredibly absurd. After sacrificing numerous lives, the Holy Grail was actually found. But Galahad, who found the Grail, was said to be a saint who had no desire and no wish. Therefore, the moment he held the Holy Grail, it returned to heaven, as did Galahad's soul. However, there are 2 points that contradict the legend. First, only a saint with no desire and no wish can hold the Holy Grail. One can check with good echo about that. Everyone knows what kind of person she is. Since she collected so many Holy Grails on her path to saving humanity. Second, considering the current situation in Britain, Galahad cannot be a person with no desire and no wish. Unless he is a very heartless bastard, he cannot remain indifferent to the impending destruction of Britain and his colleagues in the Knights of the Round Table who are risking their lives. However, according to Artorius's judgment, it is clear that he is not that kind of person. Galahad is not an indifferent person. So, it's impossible for him to be a person with no desire and no wish. He is just like the other Knights of the Round Table, full of compassion, friendly to his colleagues, respectful and admiring of King Arthur, sincere with friends, and even willing to betray his father for justice. How could such a perfect knight be indifferent? So, there is only one truth. Galahad did not return to the heavens, he was eliminated. And the one who eliminated Galahad was someone like Ultimate One, Gaia, or Alea. If we reason further, everything is part of Gaia's conspiracy. If fate were to mysteriously recede, Gaia, who obeys fate, would never allow Britain to remain in an age of gods and a true ether kingdom. It absolutely won't allow Britain to obtain the Holy Grail. So, they must kill Galahad. They must make the Holy Grail return to the heavens. Or rather, they must take back the Holy Grail to the reverse side of the world. From this perspective, the effort to find the Holy Grail is undoubtedly futile. Artorius. As Artorius's expression kept changing while pondering about the Holy Grail, Artoria became slightly worried. She continued to comfort him, saying, "Don't worry. We will succeed." Yeah, I believe you, father." Artorius, like the most ideal attractive boy, displayed the most perfect smile to his mother. "But, father, how long will it take to find the Holy Grail? What should the people of Britain do during that time?" Seeing Artorius, who had grown up and resembled her reflection, Artoria displayed a troubled expression. Artorius reached out and held her hands. "Please leave this difficult problem to me. How about that?" Chapter 14, Heir of White Dragon King. On the second day after the campaign against the usurper king, in the northern part of the British Isles, atop a snowy plateau that seemed frozen for eternity. On this land, known as Scotland in later times, a young visitor arrived. Artorius Pendragon, a knight in his youth, accompanied by his 3 followers Gareth, Galahad and Mordred, 4 knights in total, advanced toward the gathering place of the Saxons. "We are messengers of King Arthur," Gareth shouted fearlessly. "We demand an audience with the Saxon leaders." Such a cry attracted a large number of ragged Saxons, mostly men but also women and elderly individuals. Most of them bore frostbite in various parts of their bodies. These disheveled, gloomy-eyed Germanic immigrants stared at Artorius and his companions with a mixture of hatred and, more prominently, fear. In the eyes of the Saxons, King Arthur and his knights were the symbol of invincibility, having emerged victorious time and time again in the 11 consecutive battles fought before. "Well, let me see." However, in the next moment, Artorius waved his hand, stopping Gareth. "What's the matter, Your Highness?" Gareth asked, somewhat perplexed. "Let's try a different approach," Artorius said to her. "Tell them I am the heir of Vortigern Pendragon." "Your Highness." Artorius had inherited Vortigern's territory and authority. All the lands of northern Britain had become Artorius's domain, as proclaimed publicly by Artoria herself, and it had not sparked much opposition. Nevertheless, Vortigern's surname remains Pendragon. After his death, his territory and power returned to the Pendragon family, as it should be. But, claiming to be the heir of Vortigern Pendragon on Saxon soil? This surprised Gareth and even made her somewhat angry. In a sense, it was like a betrayal to King Arthur. "This is what I deserve," Artorius said, looking at Gareth earnestly. He held the girl's wrist tightly. "The authority belongs to me, my followers, my army." "Sir Gareth! Don't you agree with that?" "Your Highness! It will benefit us." Artorius drew closer to Gareth, his presence and pressure intensifying. The relentless wars had harmed not only the barbarians but also Britain. Especially with crops dwindling, if they were to continue resolving the Saxon issue through war, they would have to squeeze the common people. "We would have to deprive the people of their food for the sake of military supplies." "Gareth, do you think that's acceptable?" Of course, it was not. In the shortest amount of time, the girl was convinced by Artorius. Prince Artorius remained a gentle and kind boy, with the only difference being his newfound sense of responsibility. "For the sake of Britain and its people, what does it matter if my personal reputation suffers, Gareth?" With Artorius speaking in such a sincere tone, Gareth's guilt and fondness for him increased significantly. I understand." Gareth nodded in a slightly flustered manner. She instinctively wanted to pull her hand back from Artorius's grip, yet felt reluctant to do so. And then, "The heir of Vortigern Pendragon, His Highness Artorius Pendragon has arrived." On the other side, Mordred had already lifted her head and shouted. The sound reverberated, causing the accumulated snow on the trees to fall. "Gareth!" Gareth frowned, feeling as if something had been taken away from her. Oh, of course, when Artorius held Gareth's hand just now, Mordred also felt somewhat offended. The knights continued their journey. Only this time, the gaze of the Saxons towards them had slightly changed. In addition to fear, curiosity, and anticipation had also grown. And so, 2 days later, Artorius's wish came true. On the gathering spot of the Saxons, on a cold and rigid patch of ground trampled by the Saxons, he met 43 cunning Saxon tribal chiefs. No need for pleasantries. Without hesitation, Artorius surveyed his surroundings and then stated his purpose. "On behalf and as the heir of Vortigern Pendragon, I command you to swear allegiance to me." Artorius's words naturally evoked surprise and opposition. But in the next second, a strong sense of fear, the biting cold of ice, and the aura of dragons descended. It was the authority Artorius had inherited from his great-uncle. The fear of being killed at any moment confirmed to all Saxon chieftains that Artorius spoke the truth. This draconic power and fear reminded them of the terror of being ruled by the White Dragon and the shame of being driven by foreign races. "Any objections?" Artorius surveyed his surroundings. "In that case, step forward one by one, state your names, and kiss my ring." The Saxons looked at each other, shaken, but none dared to comply with Artorius's words. "Just because you are the White Dragon King's heir doesn't mean we have to obey you." Finally, a chieftain gathered his courage and shouted. We followed the white dragon's will, travelling far to Britain, with promises of wealth and land. But all we received was death and suffering. Now that he's dead, why should we let another Celt from Britain ride on our heads? His words gained support from many Saxons. Yes, he's right. That's it. We won't be fooled again. Get lost, Celts. Out of respect for the White Dragon King, we won't kill you. What should we do next, Your Highness? Beside Artorius, Galahad asked softly. At the same time, Gareth and Mordred tightened their grip on their weapons, ready to escort Artorius and make a break for it. But they didn't have to. All bark and no bite. Artorius calmly commented, just like a pack of wolves. The new alpha needs to display overwhelming power, and the pack will obediently submit, showing their bellies in surrender. Artorius's words left Gareth feeling somewhat conflicted. However, now wasn't the time to tend to the girl's emotions. He drew his sword and loudly proclaimed to the Saxons, I can wipe you all out, just by myself. Above their heads, dark clouds gathered at the swiftest pace, symbolizing the impending arrival of thunder and storm. Chapter 15, Path of Conqueror. The fear of the Saxons towards dragons had intensified. Back then, Vortigern's reign of terror was not solely targeted at the Celts. It applied equally to the Saxons who sought refuge. Even though he was already dead, the imprint of fear remained deeply ingrained in the soul of every Saxon who set foot in Britain. However, the Saxons still refused to yield. Of course, that didn't mean they continued to voice their opposition either. They waited, continued to wait, to see if Artorius could say anything that would move them. I know what you're thinking. Artorius said loudly, looking around. His voice was enhanced by magecraft, ensuring that every Saxon present, numbering in the tens of thousands, could hear him. You fear King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. Because you are no match for them. You believe that marching south again and engaging them in battle would be a futile endeavor. At the same time, you're unwilling to remain in this north side, aren't you? Artorius's mouth curled into a pleased smile. This place is cold and barren, barely able to sustain anyone. The Picts who originally inhabited this land are on the brink of extinction. Of course, returning by ship to the Germanic lands is not a solution either. Because the situation there is even worse than here. You can't move forward, can't retreat, and can't wait. You believe you're doomed, am I right? With Artorius's words, heavy pressure caused the expressions of the Saxons to grow even darker. Everyone's posture became more hunched. The Celts considered the Saxons to be barbarians and invaders. Many Celts in Britain didn't understand. Clearly, the situation in Britain was dire. The land grew poorer with each passing year, and the output of forests and fields diminished year after year. Given these circumstances, why did the Saxons insist on coming here to their deaths? Why were the Saxons willing to endure the terror of the White Dragon, even if it meant fighting desperately against the Celts? Of course, it was because their original homeland was even more damn wretched than Britain. Gaia's objective was the annihilation of the Celts. As a means to achieve this objective, the climate weapon not only affected the Celts but also impacted the lands of the Germanic peoples. In fact, it was even more severe. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been the Germanic peoples invading the Celts, it would have been the other way around, the Celts invading the Germanic lands. After addressing the issues facing the Saxons, Artorius raised a finger. The tone of the boy carried temptation. I can solve this problem. Saxon brethren, I can solve your problem. I can provide you with a stable life, free from turmoil. Your children, your wives, your parents, and of course, yourselves. I can let you survive. As for why I dare to make such a claim, tell them, Mordred. Tell them about my other identity. Mordred stepped forward immediately. Standing before you is the future King of Britain, the son of King Arthur to whom Knights of the Round Table pledge their allegiance. He is also the rightful heir to the throne of Britain. Such a statement once again shook the Saxons. Can you, on behalf of King Arthur, acknowledge our right to exist in Britain? A Saxon chieftain stepped forward, somewhat excited, and asked, testing the waters. Only in part. Artorius calmly replied, then declared. I won't settle all Saxons in Britain. I want you to follow me southward, to a warmer and more fertile land, the continent of Europe. My goal is to unite multiple tribes, defeat Rome, and conquer Gaul, Spain, Italy, and Greece. These lands are abundant and prosperous. As followers of the Dragon of Britain, you deserve your rightful spoils, wealth, money, livestock, and land. Now, choose. Will you face death or swear allegiance to me?" As Artorius's words fell, the Saxons exchanged glances. One of the oldest and most respected chieftains stepped forward. In that case, he unfastened his sword and knelt down, presenting it. "We will, of course, choose to swear allegiance to you." On that evening, inside the camp of the next generation Knights of the Round Table, while the Saxons were packing their belongings, preparing to follow Artorius southward, a discussion was underway. "Your Highness, you also know, don't you?" Galahad calmly spoke beside Artorius. "Britain has always had a serious food problem. If we don't import from the continent, we won't be able to fill the gap. And now you've accepted tens of thousands of Saxons. Are you sure it's not a problem?" "There are two paths before us," Artorius said. "One is to let the Saxons join us. The other is to wipe them out. So, which one should you choose? What if we just leave them be?" Mordred questioned from the other side. "And how is that any different from wiping them out?" Artorius countered. Troublesome, indeed." Mordred muttered, but she didn't oppose further. As for Gareth, after a brief moment of worry and confusion, she became consumed by a fanatical admiration for Artorius. "Oh, what a great young man he is! Shouldering the lives and well-being of tens of thousands. Even if they are enemies, showing them mercy and redemption. That shining light of him is the true proof of a great king." Of course, it was not quite so. At least, not entirely. After Gareth and Galahad had left, Artorius once again sneaked away and entered Mordred's tent. "I have something to tell you, Mordred. I'm only telling you this, so don't mention it to anyone else, all right?" Artorius pulled Mordred aside, adopting an attitude of sharing a secret with the girl. "The reason for accepting these Saxons as subordinates goes beyond that. It's because I want to accomplish something greater." "Something greater?" "My identity, as King Arthur's son. It grants me honor and status. But at the same time, it carries immense pressure and burden. My father was a great and righteous king. So, as his son, I must achieve feats worthy of my position to not let my father down. Furthermore, I want to accomplish even greater deeds than my father. I want to become a superior and greater ruler than him." That excitement and joy permeated Artorius's words. "The recruitment of Saxons is just the first step. Do you think I'm joking when I speak of marching onto the continent? No. The grand plan I wish to establish is not limited to Britain alone. It encompasses all of Europe, the entire world. I want the whole world to cheer for the name of Artorius. That is my purpose, Mordred." He held onto Mordred's shoulder. "On this great and challenging path, I expect your support. Can you, Mordred, be my companion and challenge this world together with me?" Chapter 16, My Brother, Mordred. As a homunculus, Mordred's actual age is still that of a child. As a child, Mordred's emotions are easily stirred. Just like now. "I am needed by someone. I am acknowledged by someone. Artorius has invited me to do such great things. He wants me to be his companion." Just thinking about it filled Mordred with excitement and joy. She could hardly contain her excitement and could only express her attitude through continuous nodding. "I feel like we get along well." Watching Mordred like this, Artorius continued happily, "We will be great friends." "No, we are already great friends, right, Mordred?" Yes. Yes. We are great friends." The following conversation was cheerful and filled with care between friends. Usually, it was Artorius showing concern toward Mordred. For example, "How have you been lately? How do you feel? Is there anything you need help with? The weather up north is so cold, I've prepared a cloak for you. Why don't you try it on? Ah, it fits you well and matches you, Mordred. So, how was your life before? Can you tell me about it? Oh, sorry, I made it difficult for you. Let's change the topic then." Just like that, Artorius's care, friendship, and value made Mordred feel extremely excited and happy. However, amidst the excitement and happiness, Mordred also felt uneasy. The more she intimated with him, the higher her level of unease. It wasn't until over 2 hours later when Artorius said, "It was getting late, I apologize for taking up so much of your time. But chatting with you, Mordred, was delightful." At that moment, Mordred finally realized why she felt this way. Since they were such good friends, there shouldn't have been any secrets or reservations between them. But she was still wearing her helmet. She couldn't even reveal her own origins to Artorius. In this way, she could never truly become Artorius's close friend, stand by his side, or respond to his friendship and love. Artorius. Thus, as Artorius stood up, preparing to leave, Mordred called out to him. Do you need something else, Mordred? Although Artorius already had an idea of what Mordred wanted to do, he maintained a perplexed expression on the surface. In fact, there were some things I needed to tell you, and that's... After hesitating for a moment, Mordred slowly took off her helmet, revealing a face that was almost identical to Artoria's, albeit with a more youthful demeanor. Artorius shows a slightly surprised expression. Mordred? You are? He sits back down, astonished, gazing at the girl's stunning appearance. The truth is, I am King Arthur's son. Mordred blushed and whispered softly. Then, she stammered a bit as she revealed her true identity. Of course, what she said was not entirely accurate but rather a recounting of what her mother, Morgan, had told her. Certainly, Artorius wasn't concerned about the truth of the matter about son. On the contrary, he cared more about Mordred herself, the powerful and obedient pawn. I see, so it turns out, you're the son of the king and Morgan Le Fay. Artorius muttered expressionlessly, making Mordred feel nervous. Having impulsively confessed her true lineage earlier, Mordred now regretted it a little. What if Artorius disliked her because of her identity? She watched as Artorius turned around, approached her with an emotionless expression, and her heart raced. Just as she was about to apologize after closing her eyes, Artorius happily grabbed her hand. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he embraced her directly. So, Mordred, you're my dear brother. Mordred. The situation was completely different from what she had anticipated. That's great, really great. I always thought our father only had me as his child, but now I have a little brother. Ha ha ha. Artorius spoke these words and playfully leaned over to kiss Mordred on the cheek. The joy and tenderness quickly eased her tension, causing Mordred to reveal a somewhat silly smile when embraced by Artorius. The gentle girl embraced him as well. I've been acknowledged. I've been accepted. I have a family. I am Artorius Pendragon's brother. These intense emotions made her body warm, and following Artorius's lead, she kissed his cheek in return. But, this was different. Not just one kiss, but a continuous stream of kisses. It seemed like she wanted to express just how much she liked Artorius in this way. Originally, it wasn't a big deal. After all, in that era and country, considering the customs and societal norms of the time, kissing wasn't unusual. As they were still considered family, even if Artorius stayed in Mordred's tent that night and they slept together, it was entirely normal, right? Unfortunately, we didn't recognize each other earlier, did we? I hope that more intimacy can make up for this regret and partially make up for the lost time. Artorius said earnestly while looking into her eyes, causing Mordred to be completely devoted to him. Domu. Domu. Mordred nodded continuously, willing to do anything Artorius asked of her. Rest assured, from now on, your big brother will be by your side. You won't be alone anymore. Artorius gently reassured her before Mordred fell asleep. Mordred, a girl whose true age was still that of an underage lowly, slept comfortably and without worry for the first time. After a while, in the middle of the night, Artorius disappeared. Gareth. I really need you. Can you help me, my dear sister? In Gareth's tent, Artorius held his cousin's hand, causing her to blush. And so, that night, a girl who couldn't resist the heat any longer ended up having another person in her bed. Of course, nothing lewd happened. Chapter 17, The Plan. The next morning, Galahad observed the energetic Gareth and Artorius, who appeared as if he hadn't slept well, yawning. He couldn't resist saying something. Your Highness. Please, exercise restraint. Restraint? Oh. I will be mindful of that. Because the previous night, Artorius had quietly entered his tent and said, Galahad, I trust you the most. You're my best friend, come with me. Yes, that night after Artorius's talk with Mordred, he came to his most trusted people's camp and asked for their assistance on his plan. And so, Galahad who agreed felt responsible for Artorius. Of course, Gareth and Mordred felt the same way. While gaining assistance and loyalty, Artorius also acquired certain obligations. Choosing this path meant sacrificing some of his freedom as he took on significant responsibilities. Throughout the day, he had to discuss his goals and ambitions with everyone, and during the night, he had to provide massages for his two sisters, Gareth and Mordred. All of those deprived him of rest time. Perhaps this was the price he had to pay to become a ruler. Later on, in the city of Camelot, the location of the Knights of the Round Table, Artorius Pendragon spoke confidently before the smooth round table. The young prince exuded confidence and was brimming with vitality. Unlike the majestic and perfect appearance of King Arthur, he appeared more radiant and gentle. His recent victories and the subjugation of the Saxons significantly elevated his youthful charm. Just by looking at him, many female knights and noble women of Britain couldn't help but feel delighted. In conclusion, I believe it would be beneficial to accept this group of Saxon immigrants as subjects of Britain. After Artorius finished speaking, he surveyed the surroundings and then smiled at his mother. Artoria remained calm and silent. On her face, which resembled Mordred, it was hard to discern her emotions. However, it was Gawain who spoke up first. From the perspective code of chivalry, we should indeed not abandon those people. However, Gawain hesitated for a moment, then continued, Britain's land is struggling to sustain even our own people. We don't have surplus food to provide for the Saxon immigrants. What about purchasing food from the south? Suggested Percival, one of the most loyal knights. He didn't want to see the kingdom's ruler in distress. In reality, our treasury is also strained, interjected Agravain. Despite being Artorius's teacher, he remained impartial when assessing the issue. We cannot afford to spend too much money and resources to buy food. Not to mention. Without him needing to say it, everyone understood his meaning. The embargo policy of the Roman Emperor Lucius Tiberius forced Britain to allocate more money to purchase food. This strained Britain's finances even further. In such circumstances, it was already challenging to ensure the country's food supply. However, apart from individuals like Agravain, who possessed an iron will and were ruthless, none of the knights present could utter words like, "Let's not care about the lives of those Saxon people. In fact, we can attempt to reclaim more land." When the Knights of the Round Table found themselves in a predicament, Artorius spoke up and presented his plan. Britain's land is actually abundant. Those forests, grasslands, and marshes have many fertile areas. With a little cultivation, we can obtain sufficient returns. That would be the destruction of nature, shouted one of the knights, visibly frustrated. As a descendant of the ancient humans contaminated by true ether, the Celts had a much better attitude towards nature and the earth compared to future generations. Despite the earth and nature treating the Celts ruthlessly and without mercy, intending to kill them all. The ancient humans in Britain had such an attitude, but Artorius was different. His attitude towards destruction, cultivation, deforestation, land acquisition, and transforming the natural landscape was more relaxed than all the Celts present. Ensuring human survival came first. Humans came first. It was wrong to let humans die in order to protect nature. That was a misplaced priority. Even if they tried to protect it, London in the 18th century would still turn into a city of fog. Industrial pollution would explode, and the entire River Thames would become a foul-smelling sewer. That was also the choice of fate. So now, Britain was on the verge of destruction. It was ridiculous to worry about such trivial matters and shout "How dare you" and blah blah blah. Artorius felt that those fools should be thrown into the River Thames to drown. That's the problem. Artorius said loudly, starve or cultivate more land. Do we choose humanity or nature? He looked seriously at the knight who spoke. Before you speak, think about who you are, knight. Are you on the human side? As Artorius spoke, Mordred, who was sitting not far away, narrowed her eyes slightly and gripped the hilt of her sword. It was as if she would strike out with her sword if that person dared to oppose her dear brother. No objections. Artorius looked around and then said, "Then let's do it, father, and all the Knights of the Round Table." Artorius proclaimed loudly. "We should have done this a long time ago. Britain's production decreases every year. If the average yield per acre of land is decreasing, then we should increase the area of cultivated land. We all know that agriculture brings more food than hunting and gathering. From today on, Britain needs deforestation, land reclamation around lakes, and fighting for land in the wilderness. From today on, Britain can no longer rely on the favor of true ether. We must use our hard work and wisdom to feed ourselves. After finishing these slogan-like words, Artorius looked at Artoria. I have prepared a complete plan, father. I would like you to take a look at it. The plan Artorius mentioned was a series of research achievements he had made before. It included water wheels, dams, and canals for water management, drought-resistant and cold-resistant wheat breeding, convenient and deep plowing plows, various agricultural tools, and so on. Of course, all of this couldn't save Britain. But it could delay Britain's decline and buy time for Artorius's next step, the racial integration plan. But all of this will take time. Sir Kay, Artorius's uncle and one of the Knights of the Round Table, asked somewhat helplessly, what should we do before your cultivation plan is implemented? That's what I'm going to talk about next, Uncle Kay. Artorius smiled at him and said, I propose that we mend our diplomatic relations with Rome. Chapter 18, Sacrifice. Artorius. Artorius spoke up as Artorius reached this point. I have a decree, Britain will not succumb to Rome's coercion, and I will never surrender to Rome. Of course, Britain will never surrender to Rome, Artorius calmly replied. It is the Saxons who will surrender to Rome. What do you mean? Artoria's expression appeared somewhat puzzled. What I mean is... Artorius paused for a second and continued, I will present myself as the leader of Saxon and pledge allegiance to Rome. I will lead the Saxons and a portion of the Britons volunteers to fight under Rome's command. In exchange, Rome will lift the food embargo on Britain. What? That cannot be allowed. Artoria vehemently raised her head, looked at him, and decisively refused. At the same time, the Knights of the Round Table around them also realized the situation. Britain would not submit to Rome for the sake of honor, but the Saxons were different. The number of Germanic soldiers serving within the Western Roman Empire was even greater than that of Roman soldiers. It wouldn't be a problem for Saxon troops to blend in since they were also Germanic peoples. Furthermore, Artorius was the crown prince of Britain, and as the first in line to the throne, his journey to Rome could also serve as a form of hostage. Rome had always been fond of accepting the so-called foreign barbarian princes, educating them in Roman ways and civilization, and molding them to be obedient when the time came. This approach had been used countless times throughout history. As long as there were people willing to sell their values and cultivate their own followers, this kind of approach would never come to an end. Of course, there were times when this approach backfired. Take, for example, the famous Attila. She had been a hostage in Rome. The Roman rulers at that time were particularly hopeful, expecting her to become a loyal Roman in spirit. Unfortunately, they failed. After returning to the Huns, Attila became Rome's greatest nightmare. The knowledge and familiarity she acquired in Rome became a weapon against Rome. She nearly destroyed the Roman Empire and continues to influence the world to this day. But even so, Rome was unlikely to refuse the prince of the province of Britannia. Your Highness, you intend to use yourself as a hostage to secure benefits from Rome while preserving Britain's honor. One of the knights said with a complex tone and expression. Many knights of the Round Table respected Artorius at this moment. He appeared noble and grand in their eyes. As a prince, it is my duty to contribute my strength to this country, achieve merits, and earn reputations, Artorius said in a serious and unquestionable tone. This is the most reasonable approach. Yes, Britain's honor and reputation would be preserved, and the channel for importing food would remain open. Sending troops to aid Rome in battle would also save resources and provide valuable combat experience. Countering the spread of the Germanic peoples on the continent would contribute to Britain's national security. There were countless benefits to be gained. The only one at a disadvantage would be Artorius himself. What a great sacrifice this was! Do you have any other requests? After a moment of silence, Artoria finally approved Artorius's plan. With a complex emotion and tone, she asked such a question. I need manpower. Artorius calmly said. Please allow me to recruit volunteers within Britain. And within the Knights of the Round Table, assign a few knights as my aides. I agree, but you must seek the consensus of those present here. As Artorius had anticipated, even under such a heavy and oppressive situation, the knights seemed eager. Even Kay, who kept muttering bloody hell, wouldn't dare to refuse Arthur's invitation. He even had a faint sense of anticipation. Although Artorius had never intended to recruit him. Setting aside his ability to get things done, this guy was known as one of the two scoundrels of the Knights of the Round Table, alongside Merlin. His capability to cause trouble was overwhelmingly strong. It would be better to keep such talent in Camelot for retirement. In the end, the people Artorius chose didn't come as a surprise. Galahad, Gareth, Gaheris, Agravain, Gawain, and Mordred were all his close relatives. In addition to that, Artoria provided Artorius with a means to contact Lancelot and promised to write a letter, asking Lancelot to look after them. Lancelot had been stationed in Gaul recently, primarily for trade with the European continent, mainly purchasing food, so he did not attend this round table meeting. That will be all. After all the discussions were concluded, Artoria calmly gave the order to the knights of the round table. The knights understood the king's feelings and did not say much, but with worried eyes, they looked at their ruler before saluting and taking their leave. In the end, only Artoria and Agravain remained in the room. Sir Agravain. In front of this perpetually resolute man, Artoria rarely showed signs of weariness. I can't believe even Artorius will have to sacrifice. She murmured. It's just a temporary difficulty, my king, Agravain respectfully replied. As long as we can find the Holy Grail, all problems will be resolved effortlessly. Yes. Artoria nodded. The troubles of the kingdom, the Saxon problem, and even the Roman issue. With the major threats to Britain dealt with, we can finally achieve some semblance of stability. Yes, your majesty. Then, send out all the knights, Artoria ordered. Let every knight of the round table search for the Holy Grail. To save my homeland and my son. At this moment, Artoria made a mistake. Her son did not need saving. Artorius Pendragon was filled with ambition, eager to make his mark on the vast and fertile lands of Europe. Many people in Britain, like him, actually did not require Artoria's salvation. For instance, the second sons of the ordinary knights. They were just like Artoria before she drew the sword. They underwent knightly training while also tending to household chores and menial tasks. They had only a few hours of sleep each night, from dawn until daybreak. When they grew up, the land would belong to their elder brothers, and they would receive nothing. They would serve their brothers as a squire. The frustrations and restlessness of a future unseen, even if Britain were truly saved, their fate wouldn't change. Until Artorius appeared before them, offering a new choice. Of course, before that, Artorius had to travel to Rome, seeking new allies and support for himself. Chapter 19, Lucius Tiberius. 15 days later, at the mouth of the Rhine River, within the Roman camp, Artorius met the current Western Roman Emperor, Lucius Tiberius. This Roman emperor was not enjoying the warmth of the Italian court but rather actively engaged in the front line against the Germanic peoples. The Rhine River served as a natural geographical boundary for Frankish territory. During the Roman Empire, the Rhine was always at the forefront of resistance against the barbarians in the Black Forest. By Artorius's side, only Mordred accompanied him as an envoy from Britain to meet the Roman emperor. The eunuch guiding them, with inherent arrogance, kept listing a series of requirements for the audience with the emperor, continuously emphasizing the importance of these matters. It was as if a slight misstep from Artorius would lead to his execution by beheading. In contrast, Artorius was more concerned about the soldiers in the camp. Barbarians, barbarians, and more barbarians. Within Lucius's camp, there were Goths, Vandals, Saxons, and Franks, barbarian warriors wielding axes, unkempt beards, and clad in chain mail. Their numbers far exceeded those of the Romans, wearing larica segmentata and carrying long shields and spears. Ever since the Roman Empire suffered heavy losses against the Persian and Hunnic cavalry on the battlefields of the East and West, weapons like short swords had fallen out of favor. The Roman testudo formation still existed today, but the soldiers relied more on long spears than short swords. Those things were useless against cavalry. I dislike this place. Beside Artorius, Mordred whispered, "It stinks here, much worse than Camelot." Mordred was right. The sanitary conditions in the camp were far from ideal. It seemed that the last remnants of Rome had completely forgotten the strict requirements for a military encampment. "I rather like it." Artorius surveyed his surroundings cheerfully. "The land where heroes wield their might. Do you understand what I mean? Artorius Pendragon, son of the King of Britain, here to pay respects." Before Mordred could say anything else, the eunuch had already raised his head high and shouted in a shrill voice that an ordinary person could never achieve. This was Artorius's first meeting with Lucius Tiberius. He was a young man dressed in splendid garments, adorned with a laurel wreath upon his head. His appearance was remarkably handsome, boasting short crimson hair. His expression conveyed a rebellious nature, reminiscent of a captivating blend between a tyrant and a dandy. He propped up his legs and reclined on a throne adorned with red velvet, enjoying fruits and wine from the warm regions. Several nobles in robes and armored generals stood on either side. They were all trusted confidants of Lucius. Artorius Pendragon, Lucius spoke mockingly to Artorius, "Are you here as a representative of the province of Britannia, which you people call Britain, returning under the great rule of Rome?" "I cannot represent Britain." Artorius replied with dignity, "I can only represent myself." "Tisk, then it's meaningless." Lucius rolled his eyes. "A hostage, seeking Rome's favor, eh? Your father is truly a cold-hearted man, Lord Pendragon." "I haven't finished speaking." "Very well, I will give you another 3 minutes." "It won't take that long." Artorius answered, "I can only represent myself and 50,000 Saxons, 3,000 exceptional Saxons warriors, and 200 knights of Britain." "Oh!" It was evident that Artorius had successfully captured the attention of the Roman Emperor. "Speak, you spark my interest." "King of Saxon, this is another identity of mine. And I also have the authority to recruit knights from Britain," Artorius said respectfully. "The former comes from my great-uncle, Vortigern Pendragon. The latter is a promise from my father, the king. Additionally, I have come here not by the king's command, but on my own accord." "And what is the reason?" Artorius didn't answer immediately, instead giving a meaningful glance. Lucius waved his hand dismissively, saying, "Step aside." His attendants and lower-ranking officials around him all left the tent. At the same time, a bounded field was raised, isolating the interior from the outside. Only Mordred remained by Artorius's side, and likewise, only one towering, robust guy stayed by Lucius's side. "Lord Pendragon, now you can speak," Lucius said in a relaxed tone, seemingly confident that Artorius posed no threat to his safety. Artorius nodded, then said the so-called reason, "Because my father, the king, possesses eternal youth and immortality." Even after he drew the sword of selection, for 10 years, the king remained as youthful as in his prime. And even after another 20, 30, or 50 years, he would still retain his youthful appearance. "Your Majesty, do you understand what that means?" "It means Lord Pendragon cannot inherit the throne." "That is correct," Artorius lowered his head. "Britain belongs to my father, in the past, present, and future. Even after my eventual demise, the king will continue to remain young and ageless. I love my father, but can there be a prince for 40 years? If I were to stay in Britain, allowing jealousy and hatred to gnaw at my heart, perhaps one day I would be unable to resist meeting my father on the battlefield." "So, you came here?" "Yes, that is why I came here. With expectations for power, wealth, and ambition." "With expectations for power, wealth, and ambition." At this point, Lucius stood up and slowly walked toward Artorius. Mordred became more alert at Artorius's side, ready to engage in conflict with the Roman Emperor and protect Artorius if necessary. But in the end, Lucius Tiberius burst into laughter. "Goo ha ha ha! Excellent, Lord Pendragon, I quite like you. Ha ha ha!" He happily patted Artorius's shoulder. "Ambition, desire? Of course, no problem. Rome is generous, and so am I. Whatever you desire can be found in Rome and made possible, of course, with one condition." Here, he lowered his voice and issued a genuine threat. "You must remain loyal to me, to Rome." "Of course, my liege." Without hesitation, Artorius pledged, "I will undoubtedly swear my allegiance to you." "Bring your army here and show your talents, Lord Pendragon. I have a feeling you will become an outstanding Roman." Artorius took his leave, and at the same time, the person by the emperor's side lowered his voice. "Your Majesty, do we really have to accept this barbarian? He feels extremely dangerous to me." "Dangerous? Of course, which barbarian leader here isn't dangerous? But what about his loyalty?" "It doesn't matter. I don't care whether they are loyal or not, as long as they can be useful to me. I will keep an eye on him for you. Then I entrust it to you, my dear advisor, Sirius." At the same time, on the way out of the Roman camp, Mordred also had some questions. Your Highness. "I already told you," Artorius said to her, "when there's no one around, you can call me brother." Mordred felt happy with such a statement, and she even almost forgot what she should say next. But she quickly remembered. "Brother, are you telling the truth to the Roman Emperor? About our father?" Half of it, Artorius said. I won't betray our father. But yes, I do want to make something of myself. Oh, okay. Artorius's words matched what he had previously told Mordred, so she didn't doubt it and asked another question. Well, what do you think of the Roman Emperor then? The Emperor. At this point, Artorius said calmly. He can be replaced. Chapter 20, Long Life Prince Artorius. Good news arrived from the Roman side. The food embargo policy has been lifted. Britain can now breathe a little easier and save more cash. Of course, for some folks, this pales in comparison to the shock brought by the declaration of Prince Artorius Pendragon, son of King Arthur. To all in Britain. To all who are talented. To all who seek glory and achievement. To all who harbor ambitions and dream of making a difference. The situation in Europe is on the brink of chaos, and war presents us with the best opportunity. Come, follow me, unite under my banner. Join me in Europe, join me on the battlefield, and seize with valor and deeds everything that rightfully belongs to us. The swift steeds of the Saxon commanders galloped across the lands of Britain, carrying the will of Artorius into the hearts of all the disillusioned knights. The desire for conquest, land, and wealth reached its zenith. From noble scions to the youngest of knights, from forest bandits to despondent miners, Artorius's will swept through the barren and desolate lands of Britain like a plague, stirring up a storm. Hundreds of spears and long swords were raised high, mingled with bows and other crude weapons used by forest bandits and tribal people. In comparison to Artoria as King Arthur, Artorius may have underestimated himself. In reality, his leadership charisma was second to none, not losing to his mother at all. Although he lacked the dignity, sanctity, and wordless awe-inspiring presence of Artoria, he excelled in guiding people's fervor in his own way. He had tested his guts with Mordred, Gareth, and others. This time, he made his formal debut within the boundaries of Britain. The fervor he stirred, coupled with a leadership charisma that was not inferior to King Arthur's, combined to create an atmosphere of fanaticism that, to some extent, even surpassed that of King Arthur. Knights from all corners of Britain gathered. However, this time, they came not to rally under and pledge allegiance to King Arthur, but to the prince, Artorius. They were gathered for a war that aimed not to reclaim lands from foreign hands or protect their homeland, as Artorius had said, but to seize wealth and glory with their swords and spears. This intense desire and passion burned even brighter than the summoning of King Arthur. Especially in the face of Britain's increasing barrenness and the growing hardship of its people. The knights of Britain are the strongest. In the square in front of Camelot, Artorius stood at the center, surrounded by a crowd, and spoke loudly. His voice resounded, ensuring that every knight could hear him. We should wield our swords and spears to seize what is rightfully ours, wealth and glory. This world is in such turmoil. It is time for us to plan a new order in our own way. Whether you are a knight or a noble scion, a hunter or farmer, or people from the Saxon tribes, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. As long as you prove yourself on the battlefield, regardless of your previous status, you can become someone extraordinary. Cheers surged higher and higher. The knights and soldiers around Artorius, even those fervent commoners, cheered loudly. Long life Prince Artorius! Long life King of Saxons! Long life Son of Dragon! They really seem to support Artorius, said Guinevere, the queen consort of Artoria, or perhaps better known as her best friend, in a gentle voice, standing by Artoria's side on the highest balcony of the White Castle of Camelot. The girl, who was worthy of being the Queen of Camelot in both character and appearance, wanted to ease the mood of her dear friend. Because people could tell that Artorius had embarked on a path that was completely opposite to the king's wishes. Ambition, what an extraordinary trait in a child! Merlin appeared from the other side at the same time, and casually remarked, but I don't dislike it. Perhaps this child will truly accomplish great things. If there were other knights of the Round Table present at this moment, they would surely rebuke Merlin's frivolous behavior. Pitifully, there were none at the moment. The knights of the Round Table had either been swayed into joining Artorius's force or had been sent away, embarking on the irreversible path of searching for the Holy Grail. The military strength of Camelot had now plummeted to its lowest point in history. Neither of the two women here reprimanded Merlin. Guinevere only looked at Merlin with dissatisfaction in her eyes but said nothing. Such an attitude meant nothing to Merlin. As for Artoria, she continued to blame herself as always. If only I were stronger, if only I could save Britain faster, perhaps Artorius wouldn't have turned out like this. By like this, to be more specific, it meant becoming an ambitious military leader. From the perspective of someone like Artoria, who was a protector and a savior-like existence, Artorius was like another Vortigern. Except his goal was not Britain but the broader and more chaotic domains of Rome and Europe. From the standpoint of the King of Britain, Artoria had no reason to stop him. However, from the perspective of a mother, Artoria didn't want her son to become that kind of monster. But she didn't know what to do. She had never been a good parent. She had devoted almost all her energy to war, governing the country, and balancing the factions of the Knights of the Round Table, avoiding the responsibility of raising her child. Because she never knew how to be a good parent in the first place. "Ah, Your Majesty, you don't need to blame yourself so much about this, you know," Merlin said casually. "Because even if you devoted all your energy to educating him, Artorius would still turn out to be the same kind of person. After all, I am a wise man, and with just a glance, I can see what kind of person he is. He's not your obedient little darling. Artorius Pendragon is a born hero. His ambition rivals that of Alexander, Attila, or Julius Caesar. A person like him only has two outcomes, either death or becoming greater than anyone else. There is no third option. Look, Your Majesty, your great son is coming. Have you thought about how to bid him farewell?" While Merlin spoke, Artorius had already finished his speech. The Knights of the Round Table guided the volunteers away. They headed south, boarded the ships in Londinium, and set sail for Gaul, where they would meet the Roman army. Artorius himself turned around and headed towards the castle, preparing to bid farewell to his father, King Arthur. He had many things he wanted to say to his dearest father. Chapter 21, My Mother, Artoria. When Artorius ascended the steps of the castle once again, the first person to greet him was his nominal mother, Guinevere, a girl who appeared delicate on the outside but possessed a strong will on the inside. Over the course of 10 or so years spent with her, Artorius transitioned from initial resentment due to his knowledge of her history to developing a profound respect for her. After all, not everyone could embrace the role of a mother and raise her husband's non-biological son as if he were her own. Of course, if one were to consider the true gender of King Arthur, then, well, things become a bit complicated. Artorius decided to set such matters aside. Nevertheless, Artorius had no concerns or doubts before him. "The king is waiting for you, Artorius," Guinevere spoke, her gaze upon him resembling that of a mother watching over her child. As the savior of Britain, Artoria was often engaged in battles abroad, and Agravain, acting as Artorius's teacher, usually only focused on his education and abilities. Thus, in the absence of Artoria, the woman before him became the one who cared about his daily life. She was an exceptionally gentle and loving big sister. "Thank you, mother." Artorius nodded to her and prepared to move forward. "Artorius!" Guinevere called out to him before he could proceed. "You, be good to your father." "Of course." Artorius smiled and nodded, "I am the most filial son after all." Guinevere couldn't help but find Artorius's words strange. Although, strictly speaking, there was nothing wrong with his statement. Shortly after, Artorius faced Merlin. Well, young prince, have you discovered your own destiny?" Merlin's demeanor remained as frivolous as ever. Artorius initially thought about giving him the middle finger and leaving. But after a brief moment of consideration, he decided to say a few more words. "What have you seen this time?" Artorius paused and asked. "Nothing at all, just chaos as always," Merlin replied. "Oh." Artorius's tone remained calm, neither pleased nor saddened. "Ah ha ha ha, that's why humans are truly fascinating," Merlin said with a joyful smile as he watched Artorius depart. Meanwhile, Artorius had a subtle illusion. When it comes to towers, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Well, at this moment, Artorius thought of fairy tales. In fairy tales, princesses always reside at the very top of towers, patiently awaiting the rescue of their princes. And there would always be an evil dragon guarding the princess, opposing the prince. Unfortunately for Mother, she is both the dragon and the princess. Fortunately for me, I am both the dragon and the prince. So this time, I will be the one to love you, protect you, and save you. Artoria. My mother." Artorius thought with determination before pushing open the grand doors. The majestic and flawless king turned around, fixing her gaze upon Artorius. "Artorius." Her eyes carried a calmness tinged with a hint of sorrow. "Father." Artorius bowed to her and then stepped forward. Behind him, the magnificent white gate closed, separating the inside from the outside. Only King Arthur Artoria, and her son, Artorius, remained here. As always, when facing him, she appeared unsure of herself. In contrast, Artorius maintained his gentle smile, moving forward and reaching out to hold his mother's hand. I'm about to embark on a journey to Europe, to seek my own glory. Father, you will bless me, won't you? The Saxons have settled down, and the grain from Gaul will continue to flow into Britain. I have taken away those resentful nobles and ambitious individuals. The nation will become more stable. In this way, Britain will become better, won't it? My son. Of course, I also have my own selfish desires. Artorius said kindly, I also want to become someone great. I want you to be proud of me, father. As Artoria remained silent, Artorius's actions became bolder. He reached out his hand and, like an ordinary child, hugged his father's waist. The cold and sturdy armor prevented the sense of touch, but a warm and peculiar sensation gave Artoria a subtle illusion. From today on, you don't have to bear those burdens alone. Artorius smiled, I will share the weight of the nation with you, even if it's just a small part. I have always wanted to hand over this magnificent and perfect nation to you, Artorius. After a brief silence, Artoria spoke with a somewhat hoarse voice, I have always wanted. I know, but father, don't underestimate your son. I can do better. After saying that, Artorius lifted Artoria's face and kissed her forehead. Please bless me, father. Bless your son. To bring you victory and glory. Afterward, Artorius turned away from Artoria, leaving the city of Camelot, leaving Britain and heading to the war-torn lands of Europe. As his army gathered, the decisive battle between the Romans and the Visigoths was about to begin. The Visigoths, a branch of the Germanic peoples, descendants of Alaric who once sacked Rome, were now the strongest in Gaul. They aimed to completely expel Roman influence from Gaul. In contrast, the Roman emperor sought revenge for Rome's destruction. This battle would determine the final fate of Gaul and the destiny of the two nations. Artorius would lead the Knights of Britain to participate in this battle, making a name for himself on the battlefield of Europe. Chapter 22, War in Unstoppable Britain. This is my beginning. After another audience with the Emperor, Artorius returned to his army. The combined forces of the Knights of Britain and the Saxon army were larger than what Artorius had previously promised. There were 300 knights and their squires, while the Saxon army numbered around 4,000. In addition to the veterans who migrated from the British Isles, there were also those who joined along the way. Among them were Saxons from the continent and warriors from other Germanic tribes. Artorius didn't discriminate against anyone. Conquering a country might be possible with just one tribe, but to conquer all of Europe, he had to become the king of all barbarians, just like Attila. This was the first appearance of the Knights of Britain on the continent. After returning to his camp, Artorius summoned his Knights of the Round Table and assigned tasks. Gareth, Mordred, Gawain, and others became commanders of units or captains of knight squads, while Agravain handled administrative and logistical matters as usual. Artorius's trusted men held military authority. Regarding this, some Saxon chieftains had grievances. Traditionally, warriors of a tribe should be commanded by their own chieftains. And that's precisely why you've always failed. Artorius interrupted the Saxon chieftain without hesitation. But the current leader is me. Artorius cut off the Saxon chieftain again, know your place, or should I remind you how my granduncle Vortigern dealt with those who disobeyed his orders when you were working for him? How did he punish those who dared to defy his commands? No, your highness, not at all. We fully obey your orders. That's good. Artorius patted his shoulder, almost knocking him down. Now, any more questions? None? Very well, then let's prepare. A few hours later, fully armored Artorius joined the ranks of the Roman army. On the front lines were 5 Roman legions and 5 auxiliary legions forming an infantry formation. Artorius commanded 4,000 infantry soldiers. Emperor Lucius Tiberius, the overall commander on the Roman side, was also present. Artorius could see the Roman emperor riding in a war chariot. He raised the deep red imperial sword, Florent, the brother sword to Clarent. Shouting orders, he commanded his soldiers to maintain formation and advance. In addition to the Roman imperial guards clad in plate armor, a group of massive monsters surrounded him, phantasmal species known as giant. Wearing oversized Roman-style helmets, these giants, under the guidance of mages resembling beast tamers, moved forward with vague roars and slow steps. These desperate and deranged creatures, lacking magical energy, were destined to perish without reaching the reverse side of the world. This era marked the final feast of giants and the other monsters unable to enter the reverse side of the world. They would revel, slaughter, go mad, and eventually meet their demise at the end of this age of gods. March forward, Roman warriors! Crush all the scum! The arrogant emperor roared in excitement. Simultaneously, the Visigoths' formation facing the Roman army adopted infantry tactics very similar to the Romans. This makeshift version of infantry tactics crumbled continuously when facing genuine Roman formations. This was due to the efforts of Lucius. The Roman emperor had raised the military capabilities of Rome. Meanwhile, mages from both sides continued to cast spells, summoning massive elemental forces or unleashing magical storms. Flames, lightning, frost, rocks, and sometimes direct use of magecraft, everything was in play. All supernatural forces capable of inflicting pain, killing people, and reducing them to mere fragments were wreaking havoc on the battlefield, yet amidst this frenzied magical warfare, the Romans still held a slight advantage. Bodies continued to accumulate before the ranks. If this continued, it was undoubtedly the Visigoths who would first succumb. However, Artorius didn't want to wait any longer. "It's time for us to enter the stage." Artorius raised Clarent high and bellowed at the Knights of Britain. "What do I have by my side?" "Yes. That's right, 433 Knights of Britain. Can I depend on you to conquer the world?" "Yes. Long live the prince!" Mordred, who was closest to Artorius, shouted with the same fervor, raising her lance in response to Artorius's words. "Charge!" Driven by unparalleled confidence and arrogance, Artorius and his knights charged toward the Visigoth army in a frenzy that seemed capable of breaking through everything. At the same time, coincidentally enough, Lucius was also preparing to make his own appearance. "It's my turn, gentlemen." As he observed the front-line stalemate, Lucius discarded his cloak, jumped down from his chariot, and prepared to join the battle. As the foremost expert of the Roman Empire, a master swordsman blessed by the gods and possessing the strength of a giant, Lucius believed he would surely seize victory. But before that happened, "Your Majesty, look!" Sirius, by his side, shouted anxiously, "Those are the Knights of Britain." As Sirius spoke, Artorius and the Knights of Britain had already, like an unstoppable torrent, overwhelmed a corner of the Visigoth legion before them. Artorius led them from the front, enveloped in an unparalleled storm of magical energy. With every thrust of his lance and every swing of his sword Clarent, he swept away the enemies in front of him. The Knights of Britain were like monsters, solidifying their victory. "These Britons, they have such formidable combat strength." Sirius's voice trembled. "We've always heard that there were many talented warriors and mages under that King Arthur's command, but... ha ha ha, isn't this great?" Unlike Sirius, Lucius laughed happily. "But, Your Majesty..." "I know what you're going to say, Sirius," Lucius said casually, "but rest assured, they won't have a chance if that guy, Artorius, dares to betray me. I'll twist his head off." "Of course, you are the strongest, Your Majesty," Sirius said with confidence. At the same time, amidst the chaos, Artorius found the king of the Visigoths. "I surrender." As the opposing king shouted in a panic, Artorius wasted no time and beheaded him. Watching the headless body slowly fall, he wiped away the splattered blood from his face. "This is a good beginning," Artorius murmured to himself, then surveyed his surroundings. The Knights of Britain were pursuing the enemy, while the Visigoths were in disarray. They had won this war. Chapter 23, Celebration. As the greatest hero and the key figure in the victorious war, Artorius naturally became the center of attention at the celebration banquet. Second only to the Roman Emperor himself. "I have high hopes for you, Lord Artorius." Despite being a cruel and brutal emperor, Lucius was exceedingly generous when it came to rewarding his troops. Or rather, any emperor who was not generous enough had long been wiped out by the rebellion of the Praetorian Guard. He also called Artorius by his first name now to be more friendly. "Enjoy yourself, for Rome is always generous to valiant warriors." Goo-ha-ha-ha. Amidst hearty laughter, the emperor embraced voluptuous ladies, scantily clad and plump, one on each arm. Compared to the seriousness and chivalry of Britain, Rome was more romantic, or rather, vulgar. At the banquet, Roman generals skillfully flirted with the women of allied barbarian tribes and indulged in the company of these alluring and seductive women. Immersed in the sensory pleasures brought by fine wine and beauty, they momentarily forgot about the chaos and warfare. Such was the scheme of Rome to employ women as tools of seduction and captivate valuable targets. Latin-flavored sugar-coated bombs. Hey! Artorius turned his head, observing his subordinates to see if they had been corrupted. Lancelot, who had just arrived and joined, seemed to be thoroughly enjoying himself. He appeared quite accustomed to such scenes, effortlessly mingling among the ladies. Presumably, his encounters with both Gaul and Rome had exposed him to such situations frequently. However, just as Lancelot was about to lead the ladies to a corner for some light-hearted cultural exchange, he was struck unconscious. The one carrying out the assassination was the assassin lurking behind him, Galahad. Galahad swung an iron club, viciously striking the back of Lancelot's head. His movements were incredibly skilled, leading Artorius to believe that it wasn't the first time he had done something like this. The Lake Knight, who had been knocked out by his own son, remained silent and swiftly collapsed, before being dragged away by Galahad. "I apologize for disturbing everyone's enjoyment." The white-haired knight had a refreshing smile on his face. "I will take care of this irredeemable trash immediately. Please, pay no attention." His smile was refreshing, yet his presence exuded immense pressure, leaving those around him, who were attracted to him, unable to utter a word. Well, he brought it upon himself. That's why family matters are important. The Pendragon family is different. We Pendragons treat each other with brotherhood and respect. Father shows kindness, and the son is filial. Artorius thought with satire in his mind, with a sense of superiority, observing the father-son situation between Lancelot and Galahad. He shifted his gaze to another corner. Today, Agravain remained his usual indifferent self towards women. He was the kind of person who could make the boxers tremble in fear. No need to worry about him. The Roman lady assigned to take care of him wore a look of embarrassment, seemingly unable to find a topic to discuss. On the other side, the only one enjoying all of this was Gawain, the so-called prince in White Horse, and Artorius's cousin. Of course, given his level of expertise, it would be more accurate to say that the Roman ladies were the ones that trying to seduce him, rather than the other way around. After all, he was one of the 4 notorious individuals known in the Knights of the Round Table, alongside Tristan, Lancelot, and Kay. The average Roman lady was not in the same league as him. So Artorius didn't bother about him. Having confirmed the reliability of his subordinates, Artorius shifted his attention back to his side, only to realize that the situation was not looking good. At some point, the number of Roman ladies on his side had exceeded the cautionary limit and became exaggerated. 200, 300, 400, and still rising. Those women had a gleam in their eyes, constantly licking their lips and twisting their voluptuous bosoms and beautiful buttocks, as if unable to resist the urge to get physical with Artorius. This had considerations of both strength and authority, as well as buff from Artorius himself. It must be admitted that the barbarian chieftains, whom Roman noblewomen usually served, were generally rough and smelly old men. Compared to those guys, who were rough and uncouth, Artorius was delicate, refined, and attractive. It was like comparing a bread loaf filled with sawdust and sand to a creamy honey cake. The difference was too great. Don't look elsewhere, licking lips, look at this big sister, licking lips, ... Young man, you're so adorable, can you tell big sister your name? Licking lips, ... Stop worrying so much, young man. Let's go do something fun, a huge amount of lip licking. Artorius. He felt a bit dizzy in his head. As an undefeated renowned general on the battlefield, Artorius was still a novice in matters of love. It was no problem to fool around with someone like Mordred, a level 0 player in this field. But facing elite monsters like these Roman women, and in a group no less, was a different story altogether. It was the typical cliché of elder sister, meeting the pretty Shota. Probably not long before the confused and clueless Shota would be taken away by the hungry elder sister and subjected to physical and mental suffering and got milked dry. Yes, that's right. Another man captured by Rome's romance and extravagance. Watching this scene unfold, Lucius smirked. In this way, you will bow down beneath the greatness of Rome and become a part of it. Humph. No matter how talented you are, in the end, you will become this emperor's weapon. Lucius, in a great mood, extended his hand and picked up a grape, placing it in his mouth. Then he chewed it vigorously. His sharp and sturdy teeth quickly crushed the soft flesh of the grape. Then he swallowed it whole. In theory, a soft fruit like a grape shouldn't be chewed like that, but he just liked it. However, as Artorius pondered, maybe I should try to be more adventurous, just to expand my experiences and knowledge. At that moment, an unromantic figure in armor pushed through the crowd and whisked Artorius away. Make way! You witches! The figure yelled angrily, showing no respect to anyone. Mordred! Artorius, who was being dragged away from the banquet by his sister, experienced a roller coaster of emotions. He quickly devised a plan to deal with his little sister. However, the subsequent development was somewhat different from what he had anticipated. Are you all right, brother? Mordred asked anxiously. Those women didn't do anything to you, did they? Artorius. He was a bit speechless when hearing a hint of showing off in Mordred's concerned tone. Chapter 24, Jealousy. In a small grove outside the military camp, Artorius and Mordred were present. The moonlight filtered through the bare branches, casting a pure white glow upon the snowy ground. All right, Artorius said with a smile, reassuring Mordred, don't be so nervous, Mordred. It's not such a big deal. Not a big deal. Mordred exclaimed. But I clearly saw those women, they looked like they were going to devour you. Oh, that's just a Roman specialty, Artorius replied in a relaxed tone. After all, we'll be living in Rome for some time. It might not be such a big deal to embrace some Roman customs. But try to get used to it, Mordred, Artorius smiled. Have some fun with those noble ladies. Is it your first time? It's better to find an experienced elder sister for your first time. That's just some advice based on experience. Although it's my first time too, so I don't have much right to say such things, he continued, we must experience it, so we will get used to this kind of things, and eventually our hearts will be stronger to resist women's temptations if our enemy someday uses them on us. After saying that, Artorius turned around and pulled Mordred along toward the banquet area. Come on, we still have plenty of time. Mordred. As expected, Mordred wasn't budging. She remained standing in place, head bowed. Well, if you don't want to, I won't force you, of course. Would you like to go back to the camp instead? Artorius asked, and at the same time, Mordred felt extremely uncomfortable. According to logic, as his brother, she had no right or reason to interfere in her big brother's personal life. But the moment she imagined her dear big brother being devoured in various ways by those Roman witches, she felt a strong sense of anger and dissatisfaction. This emotion was so strange that Mordred couldn't comprehend it. Mordred. Confirming that Mordred neither obediently returned nor said anything else, she just stood there with her head down. Artorius became somewhat worried and curious, so he halted his steps, turned his head, and looked at her. What's wrong? Do you have any other questions? Mordred didn't know what to say, but she felt a sense of grievance and wanted to cry. All right. Artorius smiled, took off her helmet, and gazed at her delicate face, as beautiful as their mother's. The refined chin, eyes that shined like morning stars, and an innocent expression like that of a child. I'll stay behind then. Uamu. Hearing Artorius's words, Mordred's smile returned, and she happily pulled him back to the camp. They went about their usual routine of removing their armor and lying in the same tent, covered by the same blanket, seeking warmth from each other on cold nights. It had become a habit since they arrived on the European continent from Britain. Before falling asleep, as the big brother, Artorius would tell Mordred bedtime stories like Hatchie the Bee finding his mother, Beauty and the Beast, or Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. As the little brother, Mordred would always be fascinated by Artorius's imaginative mind and show a longing expression. For the first time in her life, Mordred received affection from someone. Her mother only relentlessly instilled hatred in her, and her fellow knights held her in disdain. Her half-sibling, like Agravain, always saw Mordred as a threat, even an enemy. Artorius was the only one who treated her so well. But I'll probably find a Roman woman to be my wife. But at that moment, Artorius was describing to her his future plan of him being taken away by a woman. Of course, Germanic women would also do. It depends on our future development plans. Or perhaps, like King Solomon, I could marry several wives to win over other tribes. Oh, right, the church doesn't allow that. So, Mordred, you'll have to work hard too. Me. Listening to Artorius talk about marrying wives was enough to annoy Mordred, but she hadn't yet understood the topic. I don't want to get married. Mordred said, frustrated. I want to stay by my brother's side forever. Being away from Britain, away from King Arthur, Mordred's mindset underwent subtle changes. In the spotlight, shining brightly, the person who filled her heart with longing was no longer her father King Arthur, but her brother Artorius. To Mordred, this was a more beautiful world. Unlike King Arthur, who was unattainable, her brother cared for her, loved her, and took care of her. All of this made Mordred feel incredibly satisfied. But now, Artorius told her that they would eventually part ways. They would separate and form different families. There would be other women to replace her, appearing by Artorius's side, enjoying his tenderness and love. With these thoughts, Mordred's negative emotions intensified to an unbearable degree. Humph! I want to stay by your side, Mordred said, but Artorius dismissed it as a childish outburst, not taking it seriously. All right, I understand. It's getting late now, let's go to sleep. Artorius said to her, making Mordred feel extremely uncomfortable. I'm serious. Domu, really, serious. Artorius's voice sounded a bit drowsy as if he was about to fall asleep. This situation made Mordred feel like crying. Even she knew how dangerous the situation was. If she didn't do something, her big brother would truly be taken away by those shameless women outside. But the problem was, what should she do? Think of a solution, Mordred. Although you're not very clever, please try to think of something. After desperately racking her brain, a brilliant idea flashed in Mordred's mind. I've got it. If my brother wants to get married, why not marry me to him? He, Mordred, oh Mordred, you're truly a genius. Mordred praised herself. Chapter 25, A Woman. As Artorius was about to doze off, he suddenly felt the blanket become heavier. When he slightly opened his eyes, he found Mordred lying on top of him. Mordred, stop messing around. Artorius closed his eyes again, his body shaking slightly, trying to shake off Mordred who was sitting on him. Actually, I have something to tell you, brother. Can't it wait until tomorrow? Instead of using words, Mordred chose to express herself through direct action. She grabbed Artorius's hand and pressed it against her chest. Artorius. He instantly woke up, opened his eyes, and looked at his little brother with an incredulous gaze. Mordred, you're a woman. Mordred responded to Artorius with her actions. After Artorius expressed his surprise, Mordred boldly leaned forward and kissed him. Half genuine, half playful. Half serious, half teasing. Artorius never imagined that his dear sister would reach this level on their first try. He thought Mordred would be conflicted, would contemplate, and feel discouraged. He expected that she would consider herself a weapon and confront him after being entangled in various negative emotions for several days. He never expected that Mordred would come directly and passionately from the very beginning. This kid is really... While enduring Mordred's direct attack, Artorius couldn't help but marvel. At the same time, he couldn't help but ponder if he had gone too far. But... whatever. A few seconds of reflection were replaced with indifference. Artorius embraced Mordred's waist. == The next day. Your Highness? Your Highness. In the early morning, Gareth arrived at Artorius's tent. I heard you suddenly left the banquet yesterday, and the Roman Emperor seemed displeased. Is everything all right? You're not up yet. Looking at Artorius sleeping peacefully on the bed, Gareth couldn't help but mutter. Then Gareth's entire attention focused on Artorius's side, on the figure with golden flowing hair. She had her back turned to Gareth. Her upper body is exposed, with smooth skin. A small yet perky bottom, slender waist, and back, formed a beautiful figure that made Gareth blush inexplicably. Such outstanding allure made her feel somewhat inferior. Mordred. She cautiously called out. Mordred didn't respond to her. Instead, she first grabbed the nearby coat and draped it over herself. She brushed her golden hair out from the collar and then put on a simple silver mask, covering her face. Only after that did she stand up, turn around, and speak to Gareth in a smug tone, like a victorious person. His Highness is tired. Do not disturb him. Wait. What? After Mordred left, Gareth took a while to regain her composure. Why did she feel Mordred was bragging? Why did she feel such strange reverence towards her? And Mordred is a woman. She never heard that before. When Mordred left, she was wearing tight-fitting clothes that accentuated her figure. Even though her body was still youthful and not fully developed, it exuded a unique teenage aura. Gareth was similar in that regard. She often wore form-fitting attire and heavy armor. The former was usually when she was by Artorius' side, while the latter was on the battlefield. So, when she realized that Artorius and Mordred were staying in the same tent and days had passed, the expression on her face grew pale. Your Highness. Gareth ignored Mordred's warnings about him needing rest and being overworked and quickly rushed to Artorius' bedside. What on earth is going on? At the same time, Artorius was contemplating whether he should pretend to be asleep or just go YOLO and face the situation. Meanwhile, Mordred was in a nearby empty warehouse, laughing foolishly and rolling around. She was saying things like, "Brother, my brother," in between her laughter. If Artorius were to witness this scene, he would surely exclaim, "Little Mo is still a child after all." To think a simple kiss could resolve everything. A pity, he didn't. After considering that evading the situation was both shameful and pointless, he stood up and chose to bravely confront it. Gareth. He looked earnestly at Gareth. If I were to say that things aren't what you think, that I only just found out Mordred is a woman, and nothing happened between us, would you believe me? Gareth instinctively shook her head at first, but soon, when faced with his sincere gaze, she changed her head shake into a nod. I believe you, Your Highness. Well, that's good. Since Gareth said that, Artorius wouldn't just abandon the girl. He reached out his hand and gently gave her a head pat, smiling without saying a word. The affection from her master made Gareth smile with joy, almost to the point of lying down and showing her belly in loyalty. Of course, that wasn't happening. Before that could happen, the man with the perpetually gloomy expression had silently appeared, putting an end to the youthful playfulness of the young boy and girl. Your Highness. Agravain calmly spoke, the Emperor requests your presence for an audience. Time for rewarding achievements, hey. Artorius stood up. I wonder what the outcome will be. It's quite exciting. In that case, Your Highness, what kind of outcome are you hoping for? Agravain asked by Artorius' side. Where do you wish to lead us? Just watch, Agravain. Artorius calmly replied, I promise you, our future will be glorious. Yes, Your Highness. Agravain bowed to Artorius. Today, even the Iron Knight was like a machine, providing Artorius with flawless and impeccable service. For Artorius, as long as Agravain maintained this state, there would be no problems. Even if he only showed complete loyalty when facing King Arthur.